Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Harryverse X. In today's episode, we explore, what if Apollo and Zeus found Harry in the cupboard and twin sun and thunder gods made him Prince of Olympus? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The ember in the dark. The night was quiet in the way that only English autumn nights manage, not peaceful, but held, like the world was pressing its breath flat against the ground and waiting for something to happen. Apollo noticed it first. He had been standing at the edge of Privet Drive for the better part of an hour, invisible to mortal eyes, watching a very old man in a very purple cloak walk up the perfectly ordinary street with the air of someone who had already decided how the evening would go. Apollo had that problem with Dumbledore. The man moved through the world like he was reading the last page of every story before it started. It was, in Apollo's considerable and well-earned opinion, deeply annoying. He watched Dumbledore place the bundle on the doorstep of number 4. He watched the old wizard linger, and this was the part that bothered Apollo, had been bothering him since the moment he felt the pulse of it from across the Atlantic, a heartbeat so blazing and strange it had pulled him across an ocean without thinking. Dumbledore lingered. He looked at the child for a long moment, and something moved across the old man's face that might have been guilt if he had allowed it to be. Then he straightened, turned, and walked away. Just like that. Apollo stepped forward without deciding to. His feet moved on their own, the way they always did when something in the universe demanded witnessing. The bundle on the step was wrapped in a blanket the color of pumpkins. A letter sat on top of it, Dumbledore's crisp handwriting spelling out Mr. and Mrs. Dursley in confident ink. The child inside the blanket was sleeping. 1 year old, maybe a little more, with a shock of dark hair that was already doing its absolute best to defy gravity. There was a mark on his forehead, a scar, fresh and angry looking, shaped like the crack of a lightning bolt. Apollo crouched down on the cold stone step and looked at this boy for a very long time. He was not in the habit of feeling things the way mortals felt them. He was the sun. He had watched civilizations rise and burn from a distance that made caring about individuals seem almost absurd. He had written prophecies that ended dynasties and healed people who had no business surviving their wounds and played music at the edges of the world when no one was listening. He did not, as a rule, feel the specific stabbing human sensation of this is wrong and I should do something about it. But he felt it now. The child's soul was not the problem, or rather, the child's soul was exactly the problem. It was too much. It was blazing and layered in a way that Apollo, who could read fates the way other people read weather, found genuinely difficult to look at directly. There were threads of prophecy tangled through this boy so old and so deep that they predated the wizarding world that had produced him. Predated the magic in his blood. There was something in this child that rhymed with something Apollo had not thought about in a very long time, and it made his chest feel strange and tight. He put one finger, very lightly, against the sleeping child's hand. The hand curled around it immediately. The way babies do, that automatic, total grip that operates without consideration or strategy. Just hold. Apollo made a sound that was not quite a word. He stayed there until almost dawn, which was how Zeus found him. The king of gods arrived the way he always arrived, as though the air itself had been waiting to announce him. No flash of lightning this time, no crack of thunder. Just a presence, sudden and enormous, occupying the space beside Apollo on the Dursley doorstep like a man sitting down at a table he already owned. Zeus had taken a human shape that was, as usual, unreasonably impressive. Tall, broad, silver-haired, with eyes the color of a sky 3 seconds before lightning strikes, that particular shade of blue-gray that meant pay attention. He was dressed in something that looked modern but wasn't quite, the way immortals always missed the minor details of mortal fashion. He looked at Apollo first. Then at the child. Then at Apollo again. "You've been here all night," Zeus said. It wasn't a question. "The scar," Apollo said, without moving his finger from the baby's grip. "Look at the shape of it." Zeus looked. Something crossed his face, complicated, layered, ancient. He was quiet for a moment in the way that he was very rarely quiet, which meant he was actually thinking rather than reacting. Dumbledore left him here, Apollo said. On a doorstep. Like a bottle of milk. I know what Dumbledore did. He's going to leave him to grow up in this house. Apollo tilted his head toward the door behind them. With those people. He did not need to explain what he meant by those people. Zeus had been watching the same thing he had, from different angles and different distances, drawn by the same impossible pull that the child's soul kept emitting like a beacon. They both knew exactly what kind of people lived in number 4, Privet Drive. He has a plan. Dumbledore. The boy is a piece in it. Most people are pieces in someone's plan, Zeus said. Not this one. Zeus was quiet again. He reached out, and this surprised Apollo, because Zeus did not do things like this lightly, and put 2 fingers against the child's forehead, against the edges of the scar. The child did not wake up. The child sighed in his sleep, a small exhale of breath that made both gods still. Zeus withdrew his hand slowly. No, he agreed, quietly. Not this one. They looked at each other across the sleeping child in the pumpkin blanket on the cold English doorstep. The sky behind them was beginning to go the particular color it goes just before the sun comes up, not quite light yet, not quite dark, that liminal gray that belongs to neither. We can't just take him, Apollo said, and his voice carried the specific tone of someone who absolutely intended to just take him and was working out the justification in real time. No, Zeus agreed, and his voice carried the specific tone of someone who had already decided they were going to and was simply observing the proper forms. A beat of silence. Dumbledore's blood ward, Apollo said. It's key to the mother's sacrifice. Her sister's house. It'll protect him from, it will not protect him from what is coming, Zeus said. You read the same threads I did. I know. And you read what happens to him in this house, over the next decade, if we leave him. Apollo's jaw tightened. I know. Then we're not having a debate, Zeus said, and he reached down and very carefully, with a precision that was almost startling in a god primarily associated with thunderbolts and dramatic entrances, picked up Harry Potter. The child stirred slightly, blinked dark eyes at the enormous silver-haired man holding him, and then made a sound that may have been a word or may have been a question, and settled against Zeus's chest without concern. Zeus stood there holding a 1-year-old with an expression on his face that Apollo would have paid considerable sums to paint. The ward, Apollo said. The ward can be moved, Zeus said, in the voice of a man who was the king of gods and therefore did not have to justify the mechanics of his decisions. I will have Hestia see to it. The protection moves with the boy. Dumbledore will notice immediately. Yes, Zeus said. He will. And? Zeus looked down at the child in his arms, who had, with the complete and total confidence of someone who has found a good sleeping spot, grabbed a fold of Zeus's tunic in one small fist and gone back to sleep. Something moved across the King of God's face that was almost impossible to name. It was too slow and too deep to be an ordinary emotion. It was the kind of thing that happens to very powerful beings when they are surprised by something much smaller than themselves. And he will adapt, Zeus said. Apollo stood up from the doorstep. The sun was his, had always been his, and he could feel it building just below the horizon, waiting for his signal. He gave it, a small, unconscious permission, and the first true light of morning broke across Privet Drive in a sweep of gold that was perhaps slightly more dramatic than a normal sunrise. We should take the letter, Apollo said. Leave it. Leave it? Zeus, they'll know he's gone, they'll assume, I said leave it, Zeus said, and he was already walking, carrying the child with a steadiness that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with certainty. Let Dumbledore find an empty doorstep and a letter with no recipient. Let him wonder. A pause. He has been playing games with lives for too long. Let him experience the board changing without his permission. Apollo looked at the empty doorstep for a moment. The pumpkin blanket still lay there, slightly rumpled where the child had been. He reached down and picked it up without knowing why. It felt wrong to leave it, and then followed his father across the brightening street, away from Privet Drive, away from England, away from the small and ordinary world that had been prepared for a boy who was never going to live in it. 9 years passed. Or rather, 9 years passed for the world. For Harry Potter, raised on Olympus between the sun and the storm, time was a different and far more interesting thing. He learned to walk in the halls of Apollo's palace, where the floors were polished bronze and the walls remembered music. He said his first words in 3 languages simultaneously, which delighted Apollo and mildly concerned the household. He discovered at age 3 that he could make small things float, not the accidental magic of frightened wizard children, but deliberate, curious, careful lifting, and he spent 2 weeks floating every small object he could find and arranging them in patterns on the ceiling until Apollo banned the practice after a very old and very valuable liar got involved. He grew. The way children grow, constantly and in all directions and with complete disregard for the people around him trying to keep up. Zeus, for his part, was not a natural parent. This was not a secret or a surprise to anyone, least of all Zeus himself. He was a god of enormous power and approximately zero patience for the ordinary rhythms of childhood, the repetitive questions, the unreasonable food preferences, the specific catastrophes that children manufacture from perfectly calm situations. He approached fatherhood the way he approached most things, as a challenge requiring a direct solution. He attempted, in the first year, to simply instruct Harry the way he would instruct a young demigod, and learned within approximately a week that a 2-year-old is not receptive to direct instruction about the laws of divine inheritance. Apollo found this hilarious. But Zeus adapted. He always adapted, it was, beneath everything else, his greatest power. He learned, slowly and with visible effort, the language of a child's attention span. He learned that Harry responded to demonstration rather than explanation. He learned that the boy had a specific laugh, a sharp surprised sound that burst out of him like he hadn't expected to find something funny, and that Zeus liked hearing it more than he had anticipated liking anything in several hundred years. By the time Harry was 5, Zeus had taught him to call lightning. Not safely, initially. The first time, Harry had called a bolt that took out 3 of Apollo's prized olive trees and left a scorch mark on the garden wall that no amount of divine intervention could fully erase. Zeus's response to this incident was to stand in the garden looking at the smoking trees with an expression that suggested he was extremely proud and also intended to deny everything. "You said call the lightning," Harry had said, age 5, completely unsynced, standing in the center of the scorch mark with his hair standing in 7 directions and his eyes very bright. "I called it." "I said call it," Zeus said. "Not demand it." "What's the difference?" Zeus had looked at him for a long moment. "One of them is a request," he said finally. "The other is a command. Lightning obeys commands from me because I am its king. From you," he paused. "From you it will obey because it wants to. Do you understand the difference?" Harry had thought about this with the particular seriousness that he applied to things that actually interested him. "So I have to be worth listening to," he said. "Not just loud." Zeus had looked at Apollo over the boy's head, and Apollo had raised both eyebrows in an expression that said very clearly, "Don't look at me, I'm just watching." "Yes," Zeus said. "Exactly that." Harry had nodded, apparently satisfied, and walked back inside, tracking ash across the floor. Zeus had stood in the ruined garden for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "He's going to be extraordinary." "I know," Apollo said, from behind him. "That's not always comfortable," Zeus said. "No," Apollo agreed. "It rarely is." Apollo's lessons were different. Where Zeus dealt in power and authority, Apollo dealt in understanding, which was, he maintained, a more dangerous currency in the long run. He taught Harry music first, because music was the bones of everything he knew, and he watched with genuine delight as the boy took to it with an instinctive ear that surprised even him. He taught him healing, the principle of it, the way every wound tells a story about how it was made, and that understanding the story was more important than closing the wound. He taught him about prophecy, carefully, the way you teach someone about fire, with deep respect for what it could do to them if mishandled. "The prophecy about me," Harry said, one evening when he was 8, sitting on the edge of Apollo's balcony with his legs dangling and the whole of the sky spread out in front of them like something that belonged to him. He had found the record of it in Apollo's library 2 weeks earlier and had been carrying it around in his head ever since. "The one about Voldemort." "Trelawney's prophecy," Apollo said, sitting beside him. "Yes. Neither can live while the other survives." Harry said it the way he always said important things, not dramatically, but precisely, like he was handling something sharp. "That's the whole weight of it. That's the hinge of it. Does it mean I have to kill him?" Apollo considered being careful with his answer, weighed it against 9 years of watching this child develop a nose for diplomatic evasion that rivaled Zeus's own, and discarded the impulse. "It means one of you ends the other," he said. "That's what the words say. But prophecy is not instructions. It's a description of what's most likely to be." Harry was quiet for a moment, watching the light. The sun was his godfather's domain and Harry had grown up in it, in the warm specific gold of a sun that knew who he was, and he sat in it now with the ease of someone sitting in their own living room. "What if the most likely thing changes?" he asked. Apollo looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The prophecy was made about a boy who grew up in a cupboard under the stairs," Harry said. He was not bitter about the life he hadn't lived. He had been told about it by degrees, carefully, by Apollo, who believed in informed children, and by Zeus, who believed in a person knowing their own history. He had processed it the way he processed most things, directly, and then moved on. That boy had no one. He was going to face Voldemort alone, probably frightened, probably mostly reactive. He paused. "I'm not that boy. So does the prophecy still know what I am?" Apollo was quiet for a long time. "That," he said at last, "is a question I genuinely don't know the answer to." Harry seemed to find this acceptable. He nodded slowly, and went back to watching the sky, and after a while he said, "I want to learn the combat applications of light." "I know," Apollo said. "I've been waiting for you to ask." "How long have you been waiting?" "About 6 months." Harry grinned at him, that specific grin, sharp and warm at once, that Apollo had come to think of as one of his best pieces of work without actually having made it. "Okay," Harry said. "Show me." At 10 years old, Harry Potter was not what anyone would have expected of the boy who lived. He stood about average height for his age, still with the messy dark hair that refused any instruction, still with his mother's eyes, that particular shade of green that stopped people mid-sentence, and still with the lightning bolt scar on his forehead, though it had faded to silver over the years, a clean mark now rather than an angry one. He was lean in the way that children are who spend a lot of time being physically active and not much time being still. He had a quality of presence that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore, a kind of held readiness, like something coiled but not tense. He was funny, in the particular dry way that suggested a sharp intelligence running slightly ahead of his words. He was warm, in the specific way of people who have been genuinely loved and know what it feels like in their bones. He was curious about almost everything, patient with complex problems, and had approximately no patience at all for hierarchy that hadn't been earned. He also moved like light moved, that is, as though the space around him was something he understood completely and intended to use. The first time Ares saw him spar, the war god had watched in silence for 10 minutes and then turned to Zeus with an expression that was 2 parts impressed and 1 part "this is going to be a problem for several people." "Where did he get the footwork?" Ares asked. "He invented it," Zeus said. Ares looked at the 10-year-old currently dodging sparring constructs with a fluid, almost architectural efficiency, using angles and redirections rather than raw avoidance, turning the energy of each strike into information he could use. "He invented it at 10. He invented the first version at 8, Zeus said. "He's been refining it. He's going to be, yes," Zeus said. "I know." Harry, from across the sparring ground, called over his shoulder without breaking his movement pattern, "I can hear you talking about me." "We know," Apollo called back. "Are you impressed?" Yes, Apollo admitted. Good. Harry ducked under a construct, redirected its momentum into the next one, and dismantled the whole arrangement in approximately 4 seconds with a pulse of light and a crack of thunder that was small but clean and absolute. He stood in the center of the settling aftermath, breathing easily, and looked back at them. I want harder tomorrow. Zeus made a sound that was half exasperated and entirely proud. The letter arrived the autumn Harry turned 10, or rather, a letter arrived, which became dozens of letters, because Hogwarts was nothing if not persistent, and when its first letter failed to find a recipient at the expected address it simply searched outward in expanding circles until it located its target, which eventually involved a very confused owl arriving at the edges of Olympus and refusing to leave until it had completed its delivery. The owl arrived on a Tuesday morning while Harry was sitting at breakfast with Apollo, eating pomegranate seeds and reading a scroll of Achilles' battle reports that Apollo kept for reference purposes. The owl dropped the letter in front of him and then sat on the edge of the table with the specific dignity of a creature that had endured considerable difficulty to be there and expected acknowledgement. Harry looked at the letter. The letter looked back at him in the way that enchanted mail does, with intent. Mr. H. Potter, the Palace of the Sun, Olympus. He blinked at the address for a moment. Then he looked at the owl. Then he picked up the letter, broke the seal, a wax crest, a lion and snake and eagle and badger arranged around the letter H, and read it. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read to the end, then set it down and looked at Apollo. Apollo had been watching him read with the expression he wore when he already knew the contents of something and was more interested in the reader's reaction. Well, he said. Hogwarts, Harry said. Yes. The school, Harry said. Wizarding Britain. The world Dumbledore thought I was going to grow up in. Yes. Harry picked up another pomegranate seed and ate it thoughtfully. Outside, somewhere in the palace, he could hear Zeus moving around, that distinctive quality of presence, like the air before a storm, that announced Zeus's location to anyone with the sensitivity to read it. Which included Harry, who had grown up calibrated to exactly that feeling the way a compass needle calibrates to north. Does father know it came? Harry asked. He called Zeus father and Apollo uncle, not because anyone had told him to, but because one day around age 4 he had simply started and neither God had corrected him, and it had settled into the architecture of their household like a load-bearing wall. I told him last week it was coming, Apollo said. And? Apollo smiled, slow and golden. He said, and I'm quoting precisely, of course it is. Harry laughed, that sharp surprised sound, and picked up the letter again. He read it a second time, more slowly, turning it over in his hands. Something had shifted in his expression, not excitement exactly, more like the look of someone watching a horizon and recognizing a landmark they'd heard about. The wizarding world doesn't know what I am, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Apollo agreed. They know there is a Harry Potter. A boy who survived the killing curse. A boy who was supposed to grow up with his aunt and uncle in Surrey. He paused. They have no idea what actually happened. Dumbledore must know something went wrong, Harry said. He'd have gone to check on me. He has, people. A network. He'd know I wasn't there. He knows you're not with the Dursleys, Apollo confirmed. He doesn't know where you are. He has theories. A beat. He's been looking for a long time. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then something settled in him, a decision made without fanfare, the way he made most decisions. I want to go, he said. Hogwarts. I want to learn the wizarding world's magic. See what it is, how it works. He tilted his head slightly. And I want Dumbledore to see me. You want him to understand that his plan failed, Apollo said. I want him to understand that his plan was replaced by something better, Harry said. There's a difference. Apollo looked at him across the breakfast table, this boy, this extraordinary specific person who had grown up in his house and learned at his table and who was, in ways Apollo was only now beginning to fully understand, entirely his own, and felt that same thing he'd felt on a cold English doorstep 9 years ago. That sensation of the universe drawing attention to something. Yes, Apollo said. There is. Zeus appeared in the doorway at that moment, because Zeus had an instinct for entrances. He looked at the letter on the table between them, and then at Harry, and he said nothing for a moment. He simply stood there with his storm sky eyes and his impossible presence and his silver hair and looked at the boy who had fallen asleep in his arms on a cold October morning and grown into this. Well, Zeus said finally. I want to go, Harry said. I know, Zeus said. Are you going to try to talk me out of it? Zeus moved into the room, pulled out a chair, not the largest, interestingly, that would have been the obvious choice for someone performing authority, and sat down across from Harry with his elbows on the table, which was a posture Harry recognized as Zeus being serious without performing it. No, Zeus said. I'm going to tell you what you're walking into. He reached for the letter, read it in a glance, divine reading, a second to absorb a page, and set it down. The wizarding world believes you are a symbol. The boy who lived. They have built a mythology around your survival that has nothing to do with who you actually are. They will want that mythology. They will want the version of you that fits their story. Harry held his gaze steadily. And you are not going to give it to them, Zeus said. Not an instruction. An observation. No, Harry agreed. Some of them will be afraid of what you are, Zeus continued. Some will be angry. Some will try to control you. Some will try to use you. He paused. Dumbledore most of all. I know, Harry said. Do you? Harry looked at him for a long, clear moment. Father, he said. I've known about Dumbledore's plan since I was 8. I've known what he intended for me. I've had 2 years to think about what I want to do with that information. He picked up the Hogwarts letter and set it back down with a sound that was small and definitive. I'm not afraid of an old man who thought a frightened orphan was his best option. Zeus studied him. Then he leaned back in his chair and made a sound in the back of his throat that was the closest thing to a laugh that Zeus produced in ordinary circumstances. No, he said quietly. I don't imagine you are. Can we go to Diagon Alley? Harry asked. I need supplies. And I want to go to Gringotts. He tilted his head. I also want you both to come. Apollo raised an eyebrow. You want us to come? To Diagon Alley, Harry said. Yes. Both of you. He picked up another pomegranate seed with complete composure. I want the wizarding world's first impression of Harry Potter to be accurate. There was a silence. That, Apollo said, after a moment, with a tone of voice that was half admiring and half wondering what, exactly, they had created, is going to make an impression. That's the idea, Harry said. Outside the window, across the stretch of divine sky that had been Harry's home for all of his conscious life, the sun was doing something it did sometimes on mornings that mattered, burning a little brighter than strictly necessary, a little more present, as if paying attention. Apollo noticed it. Zeus noticed it. Harry had grown up so immersed in the light that he barely looked up. He was already planning. The following morning, Zeus woke early, which was unusual, because Zeus's relationship with early mornings was historically contentious, and walked to Harry's room. He knocked, which he had learned to do around year 3 after a series of incidents. A beat, and then, come in. Harry was already up, sitting at the desk by the window with a stack of parchment in front of him and a quill moving steadily. He was making notes, cross-referencing, building what Zeus could see from the doorway was a fairly comprehensive summary of everything they knew about Voldemort's current state, capabilities, likely movements, and intentions. Zeus stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at this. You started preparing, he said. 2 days ago, Harry said, without looking up. When I knew the letter was coming. He finished a line, set the quill down, and looked at Zeus with his mother's eyes and his own expression, that particular combination of warmth and sharpness that was distinctly his. "I'm not walking in without a map." Zeus crossed the room and looked over Harry's shoulder at the parchment. What he saw was not a child's notes. It was strategic assessment, clear, organized, asking the right questions in the right order. The kind of thinking that took most people decades to develop. "You know he's still out there," Zeus said. "Voldemort." "He's not dead," Harry said. "The killing curse rebounded and destroyed his body, but the magic held. He's somewhere between living and dead, looking for a way back." He paused. "He's been looking for a long time. He'll use the opportunity my being at Hogwarts presents. He'll move against you." "He'll try to," Harry said, and there was no bravado in it, no performance. He said it the way he said everything, true, plainly. "I'd like to know his current capabilities before he does." He picked the quill back up. "I'd also like to know who at Hogwarts is his." Zeus put one hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly. The way he had learned to, not heavy, not commanding. Just present. "I'll find out what I can," Zeus said. "From this end." "Thank you," Harry said. Zeus straightened. He paused at the door. "Harry." "Yes." Zeus looked back at him, at this boy, at this person, at this thing he had not expected to happen to himself. At what a decade of actual love does to someone who grew up with none. "When we go to Diagon Alley," he said, "do not let them put you in a box." Harry looked up at him, and the smile that crossed his face was quiet and sure and absolutely itself. "I know," he said. "That's why I want you both there." Zeus nodded once, and left him to his preparations. The sun outside was doing it again, that bright, paying attention thing. Apollo must have been awake, somewhere in the palace, listening to the shape of the morning and finding it interesting. Harry put his quill down, looked at the stack of notes in front of him, and then looked out at the sky. The sky that had been his ceiling for 10 years. The sky that was his father's and his uncle's and, in the particular way that things become yours through growing up inside them, was also simply his. He thought about a cold doorstep in Surrey that he had never actually seen but that Apollo had described for him once, sitting exactly like this, with the same particular quality of honesty that Apollo brought to hard things. He thought about a baby in a pumpkin blanket and a letter addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Dursley and an old man who had walked away without looking back. He thought about what that boy would have been. Frightened. Alone. Shaped by neglect into a particular kind of brittle courage, brave because he had no choice, powerful despite everything working against him. He picked up his quill. He was not that boy. He had never been that boy, because two gods on a cold October morning had looked at an ember in the dark and decided, separately and together, that some things are not meant to be left to go out. He had been burning ever since. He wrote at the top of a clean sheet of parchment, "What I need Hogwarts to understand," from the first day. Then, because he was his father's son and his uncle's student and entirely, completely himself, he wrote for 3 hours straight and did not stop until he had an answer he was satisfied with. Outside, the sun burned gold and attentive over Olympus. The day was beginning. Chapter 2, Lessons. The sun keeps. The training ground Zeus had built for Harry was not a gentle place. It sat at the eastern edge of Apollo's domain, where the light came in at angles that were less golden and more surgical, the kind of illumination that showed everything clearly and forgave nothing. The ground was dark stone, flat and wide, ringed by columns that had taken strikes from divine lightning so many times they had developed a faint permanent luminescence. At the center was a circle scorched into the stone that Harry had made himself, on a day 3 years ago when something in his power had suddenly cohered into something much larger than it had been, and the discharge had been sufficient to leave a permanent mark. He stood in that circle now, barefoot on the warm stone, watching the construct Apollo had built take shape in front of him. It was not like his usual sparring constructs. Those were single opponents, built for footwork and reaction and the kind of combat Harry excelled at, close, fast, reading momentum. This was a formation. 7 constructs, each one keyed to a different magical discipline, moving in a coordinated pattern that required Harry to track 7 separate threat vectors simultaneously while countering each one in a way appropriate to its specific nature. "This is excessive," Harry said, watching the formation complete its assembly. He said it with interest rather than complaint. "You said you wanted harder," Apollo said, from the edge of the circle. "I said I wanted harder, not deranged. Those are sometimes the same thing." Harry rolled his shoulders, settled his weight, and looked at the formation with the particular focused expression he got when he was running calculations he didn't need a quill for. The 7 constructs were moving in a slow circuit, maintaining their spacing with the mechanical precision of things that were not improvising. They were waiting for him to make the first move. He didn't make the first move. He waited. Apollo, watching from the edge, recognized what Harry was doing, reading the pattern, finding the rhythm, looking for the moment when the formation's rotation created a gap that was not a trap. It was the same patience Zeus showed before a storm. The same quality of held readiness that Harry had been developing since he was old enough to understand the difference between reacting and responding. The formation rotated. One of the constructs, the one keyed to fire, which moved slightly faster than the others, completed a turn and presented its flank for approximately 2 seconds. Harry was already moving. What happened in the next 30 seconds was difficult to describe to anyone who hadn't been watching him train for 5 years. He went through the formation not in a straight line but in a curve, using the fire construct's own momentum to redirect himself into the next gap, hitting each construct with exactly the amount of force required to disable it without wasting energy on the ones he was simply passing. Light, his own specific version of it, Apollo's gift refined into something uniquely Harry's, moved with him like a second body, answering his intent before it fully formed into instruction. The last construct went down with a crack of small thunder and a flash that lit up the column behind it with a second of fierce clarity. Harry stood in the settling aftermath, breathing harder than he had been before, but not dramatically so. He turned back to Apollo. "Better," he said. "Again. Again." Apollo said. "Same formation, reversed rotation." Apollo looked at him for a moment with an expression that was measuring something. Not Harry's power, he had a comprehensive sense of that at this point, could feel its edges and its depth with the intimacy of someone who had watched it grow from a coal into a furnace. What he was measuring was something more specific. A question he'd been turning over for the past week, since the Hogwarts letter arrived, that had to do with readiness of a different kind. "Harry," he said. "Come here for a moment." Harry read the shift in his tone and came without argument, dropping onto the stone at the edge of the circle and looking up at Apollo with that open, direct attention that he gave to things that mattered. He had sweat in his hair and a small scorch on the hem of his training shirt and he looked, in that moment, so vividly young and so vividly not that it created a strange doubling in Apollo's chest. "The wizarding world's magic," Apollo said, sitting beside him. "You've studied the theory. But there's something I haven't taught you that you need to understand before you go." "What?" "How it will feel," Apollo said. "To be around people who are powerful in a way that is entirely human." He paused, choosing his words. "You have grown up with divine power as your baseline. It is what you understand as normal. When you walk into a room full of witches and wizards, even gifted ones, even exceptional ones, they will feel limited to you. Constrained. Like looking at a candle after you're used to the sun." Harry considered this. "You're worried I'll underestimate them." "I'm worried the opposite," Apollo said. "That you will dismiss them. There is a difference between being more powerful than someone and being better than them, and you know that in theory, but you haven't had to practice it yet." He looked at Harry steadily. "Some of your classmates will become important to you. Real allies. People worth knowing. And you will have to choose to meet them where they are rather than where you are. Do you understand what I'm asking?" Harry was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't understand, he understood immediately, as he usually did, but because he was taking it seriously, which was also typical. "You're saying that the way I show up matters," he said. Not for their comfort. For mine. He tilted his head slightly. If I walk in treating everyone as lesser, I become lesser. Yes, Apollo said. Exactly. I don't intend to, Harry said, and said it without defensiveness, simply as information. I'm curious about them. About what they can do. About the way their magic works. He picked at a scorch mark on the stone beside him. It's a different system. I want to know how it thinks. Apollo released a breath he hadn't entirely been aware he was holding. Good, he said. Hold on to that. Was that the whole lesson? No, Apollo said. The second part is about what happens when they challenge you. He met Harry's eyes. And they will. Some out of jealousy, some out of territorial instinct, some because they were raised to. The old families in particular, they have very fixed ideas about the hierarchy of power, and you will disturb those ideas simply by existing. I know, Harry said. When that happens, Apollo continued, I'm not telling you to hold back. I'm not telling you to hide what you are or perform weakness to make them comfortable. He paused. I am telling you to be precise. There is a difference between demonstrating power and wielding it. The first is for their benefit. The second is for yours. Learn the difference early. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, You've been thinking about this since the letter arrived. I've been thinking about this since we brought you home, Apollo said quietly. Something shifted in Harry's expression, that deep, private warmth that he did not show often and that, when he did, was entirely genuine. He leaned over and bumped his shoulder against Apollo's, which was a gesture he had invented at about age 6 and retained as a vocabulary item for I hear you and I love you and let's not make this sentimental. Apollo bumped back. All right, Harry said. What's next? Apollo smiled. Wand theory, he said. The channeling mechanics of a wizarding wand versus direct divine manipulation. You'll need to be able to use a wand at school without it being obvious that the wand is doing approximately 10% of the actual work. Harry stood up, dusting stone dust off his training trousers. Is that going to be difficult? For most people, Apollo said, also standing. For you it will be irritating. Which is a different problem. Why irritating? Because using a wand after direct channeling is like writing with your non-dominant hand after you've been writing normally your whole life, Apollo said. You can do it. It will simply feel wrong. Harry made a face that confirmed this immediately. Right, he said. So I learned to not let it show. You learn to make the wand believe it's leading, Apollo said. Which is a subtle and somewhat absurd skill that nonetheless has applications beyond wand work. Harry looked at him sideways. Are you teaching me politics? I am teaching you the divine art of making other things think they have more agency than they do, Apollo said, with the serenity of someone very comfortable with that sentence. Whether the other thing is a wand or a person or a legislative body is really a matter of scale. They walked back into the palace together, Harry still turning this over in his head, and behind them the training ground was quiet except for the faint luminescent hum of the columns, keeping record of all the impacts they had absorbed. Zeus's approach to preparation was more direct. 3 days before Diagon Alley, he called Harry to the Great Hall, the large formal room in Apollo's palace that no one used for formal purposes but that had the best acoustics and the best floor space and was therefore where all of their important conversations happened. He was sitting at the long table when Harry arrived, and across from him, laid out with the precision of a military briefing, were 12 sheets of parchment covered in dense notes. Harry slid into the chair across from him and looked at the parchment. Then at Zeus. Intelligence report, he said. The current state of Voldemort, Zeus said. What I've been able to determine, and what my sources in the divine infrastructure have indicated. He tapped the first sheet. He is currently a partial entity. Spirit, barely cohered. He needs a host body to act meaningfully in the world, and he needs a specific form of magic to create one that will last. He paused. He has been moving through hosts. Weak ones. He requires a vessel with some magical ability, which limits his options, but his patience is considerable. Where is he now? Harry asked, already reading ahead through the sheets. We believe he is attempting to attach himself to a vessel in close proximity to an object of power, Zeus said. The stone, the philosopher's stone, the one Flamel created. It produces the elixir of life. Voldemort wants access to it as a step toward full regeneration. He paused. It will be at Hogwarts. Harry looked up. At Hogwarts, he repeated. Dumbledore arranged it. He moved it there for safeguarding. He also, and this is significant, built a series of magical challenges to protect it. Puzzles and barriers designed for a gifted student to navigate. Zeus's expression was measured. In the original trajectory, you were meant to find the stone, face Voldemort, and survive through some combination of your mother's protection and his inability to touch you without being destroyed. A contingency defense, not a planned victory. A contingency defense that kills a child, Harry said. That risked one, Zeus said. Dumbledore's calculus is that the risk is acceptable against the alternative. Harry looked at the parchment in silence for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even. And the vessel, who is it? Who is Voldemort currently using? Zeus's expression shifted slightly, the way it did when the information was unpleasant and he was delivering it cleanly anyway, because that was what Harry had always asked of him. One of the professors at Hogwarts, he said. Quirinus Quirrell. Defense against the dark arts teacher. He encountered Voldemort in Albania 2 years ago, and the attachment has been growing since. So he'll be my teacher, Harry said. For 1 year, Zeus said. Yes. Good, Harry said. That means I'll know exactly where he is. Zeus looked at him with an expression that was not surprise but was something adjacent to it, the thing that happened when Harry's thought process got slightly ahead of even Zeus's ability to predict it. You're not concerned about the proximity, Zeus observed. Why would I be? Harry said, genuinely. He tapped the parchment. A spirit in a weakened host who can't touch me directly, using a professor position as cover while he searches for a stone that doesn't have to be where he thinks it is. He looked up. He's the one in the difficult position. He will escalate, Zeus said. I know, Harry said. That's fine. Zeus studied him across the table. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did in this room, coming through the high windows at an angle that hit the white stone walls and reflected warm and diffuse, without shadow. In this light Harry looked simultaneously very young and very not, and Zeus had the specific disorientation that he got sometimes, a temporal doubling, seeing at once the baby he'd carried off a Surrey doorstep and the person sitting across from him now. You are going to walk into that school, Zeus said, carefully, and within days, you will be in a situation that most adult wizards would find threatening. Yes, Harry said. And you are not going to wait for it to come to you. No, Harry said. I'm going to understand it completely, and then I'm going to resolve it on my terms. He paused. The stone doesn't need to be there. Can we move it? Flamel might be persuaded, Zeus said, with the tone of someone making a mental note. Make the note, Harry said, and Zeus noticed with something between exasperation and deep satisfaction that Harry had read his expression well enough to catch it. If Voldemort is going to use Hogwarts as his staging ground for regeneration, then Hogwarts is already a battlefield. I'd rather walk onto a prepared one. That is a strategic instinct that took most generals 40 years to develop, Zeus said. I had a good teacher, Harry said, with the specific dry warmth he reserved for the moments when he was saying something genuine and did not want it to land too heavily. He tapped the parchment again. Can I keep these? They were made for you, Zeus said. Harry gathered the sheets, squared the edges with the neat-handed habit that was one of Apollo's unconscious gifts to him, the musician's instinct for order in the materials, and stood up. He paused at the edge of the table. Father, he said. Yes. When we go to Diagon Alley, Harry said. I want you to let me handle most of it. Zeus looked at him. You and Apollo being there is the statement, Harry said. I understand that. But the doing, the shopping, the Gringotts visit, the way I move through the space, that should be me. I want them to see me. Not me standing next to gods. Zeus was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that with a lesser person might have been pride wrestling with protectiveness. With Zeus it was something simpler, recognition. Agreed, he said. Harry nodded once, and left. Zeus sat at the long table a while longer, in the afternoon light, with the echoes of the conversation settling around him. From somewhere distant in the palace, he could hear music, Apollo practicing, or perhaps just playing. The distinction in Apollo was not always clear. The notes came and went through the warm air with the easy authority of things that belonged. Zeus thought about a cold doorstep. About what the boy on it had been designated to become. About the machinery that Dumbledore had put in place, elegant and well-intentioned and utterly, comprehensively wrong. He thought about Harry gathering those intelligence sheets with neat, steady hands and already planning 3 steps ahead. He thought, no. Not wrong, exactly. Not evil. Just insufficient. Dumbledore had planned for a boy shaped by loss and survival instinct and the specific kind of courage that comes from having nothing left to lose. He had planned for someone who would be reactive by necessity, powerful by accident, and controllable by sentiment. He had not planned for this. Zeus picked up the last sheet of parchment, the one Harry had left, the one with his own handwriting at the bottom margin, the 3 words he'd added during the briefing without comment, controlled engagement only. Zeus looked at those 3 words for a long time. Then he set the sheet down, and allowed himself, in the privacy of the empty hall, to feel something uncomplicated and enormous, pride. Not divine pride, which was a different and colder thing. This was warm and specific and slightly uncomfortable in the way that Zeus was not accustomed to things being. He had not planned to love the boy. He had planned to protect an ember, not to be changed by the fire. The music from down the hall shifted into something brighter. Zeus stood, squared his shoulders, and went to find Apollo to argue about the Diagon Alley wardrobe. They argued about the Diagon Alley wardrobe for 2 days. Not seriously, or rather, not entirely seriously, which was the texture most of their disagreements had developed over 10 years of navigating the specific complications of divine cohabitation. Apollo's position was that Harry should dress in a way that was striking without being theatrical, allowing his presence to do the work rather than his clothes. Zeus's position was that Zeus's son should look like Zeus's son, a statement that Apollo pointed out was doing several different kinds of work simultaneously, not all of them clearly defined. Harry resolved it himself, on the morning they were set to leave, by simply appearing at the entrance hall in dark trousers, a good shirt, and a jacket that was neither Wizarding World robes nor explicitly modern, but occupied the middle ground with enough confidence to make the ambiguity feel intentional. His hair was doing its own thing, as it always had. The scar on his forehead was visible, silver and clean. He looked at both of them. "Ready?" he said. Apollo looked at Zeus. Zeus looked at Apollo. "You're not going to change?" Zeus said. "No," Harry said. "I like it," Apollo said immediately. Zeus made a sound. "I wasn't saying I didn't like it." "You were implying it," Apollo said. "I was asking a question. In a very specific tone." "This is unnecessary," Harry said pleasantly, and walked past them both toward the departure point, and after a moment both gods followed, which was, Harry had learned, the most reliable method of ending their subsidiary arguments, simply proceeding. Diagon Alley on a late July morning had the specific quality of a place that knew it was important and had been performing that importance for so long that it had become genuine. The cobblestones, the crooked tall buildings, the storefronts displaying things that behaved in ways that storefronts were not supposed to, the people moving through it all with the ease of a community doing what communities do, Harry took it in steadily, without the wide-eyed wonder that Apollo had half expected and that Harry, to be fair to himself, had decided to skip. He was interested. That was real and visible on him. But he moved through the entrance to the alley and into the crowd with the measured, curious ease of someone absorbing new information rather than someone overwhelmed by stimulus. Apollo watched the people around them. The first few seconds, no one noticed. Harry was one more dark-haired boy in the crowd, which was full of young people on school supply missions. But then, and it happened faster than Apollo had anticipated, the recognitions began to ripple outward. Someone looked at his forehead, looked at the scar, looked at his face, and went very still. Then the person next to them looked. Then the whisper started, that specific sound of a crowd redirecting its attention. "That's Harry Potter." "Is that, the scar, did you see, he's real, he's actually," Harry did not look at any of them. He walked with Apollo on his left and Zeus on his right, and here was where the second wave hit, because Zeus and Apollo in human form were still, unmistakably, something. The specific quality of divine presence that mortals couldn't name but could absolutely feel. People stepped back instinctively. Conversation stopped. The invisible social pressure of something enormous passing through a crowd took effect, and a space opened around the three of them without anyone consciously deciding to create it. "Wand first," Harry said quietly. "Then Gringotts. Then the rest." "Ollivanders," Apollo said. They moved through the parting crowd toward the wand shop. Harry maintained his direction without acknowledgement of the stares or the whispers, and Apollo watched him doing it, the deliberate, generous choice to not make eye contact, not to force acknowledgement from anyone, to simply be present in the space without demanding their reaction to him. It was the lesson from the training ground, the one about meeting people where they were. He was practicing it already. At the door of Ollivanders, a woman stopped directly in front of them. She was not young, middle-aged, with the specific angular quality of someone who had been important in a formal context for long enough that their bone structure had reorganized to accommodate it. She had ministry robes on, the kind worn by someone senior enough to wear them badly. And she was looking at Harry with an expression that was several things at once: shock, recognition, and something that was working its way toward the calculation that comes after a long-held plan has suddenly changed shape. "Harry Potter," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement," she said, and her voice had that quality of someone performing calm over considerable agitation. There was concern, some years ago, about your whereabouts." "Albus Dumbledore, I'm well," Harry said, pleasantly and completely. "Thank you." Her eyes moved to Apollo and Zeus. Lingered there. The way eyes do when they are trying to categorize something and finding that the categories they have don't fit. "And these are, my family," Harry said, in the same tone. Final without being rude. Clear without being aggressive. The tone of someone stating a fact that does not require elaboration. Amelia Bones looked at him for another moment. Then at Apollo. Then at Zeus, which was where the look got stuck for a second. Zeus had that effect on people, before she pulled it back. "Of course," she said, in a voice that indicated she intended to file a very detailed report within the hour. "Welcome back, Mr. Potter. To Britain." "Thank you," Harry said. He moved past her with a slight smile, the kind that was not dismissive but was absolutely conclusive, and pushed open Ollivander's door. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of wood and something older, the kind of smell that gets into a place when it has been dealing in important things for long enough. Wand light came from a single source near the back, and behind the counter was a man who was already watching them with large pale eyes that reflected light in a way that suggested he had been waiting for something for a very long time and had just decided this was it. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said softly. Not the way the woman outside had said it. She had said it with politics in her voice. He said it with recognition. "Hello," Harry said, approaching the counter with genuine interest. He looked around the shop as he came, the endless stacked boxes, the shelves reaching ceiling-ward, the sense of accumulated possibility. "I need a wand." "You do," Ollivander said, and his eyes moved briefly to Apollo and Zeus in the doorway, and whatever he saw there made him go very still for a moment before he brought his attention back to Harry with the deliberate focus of a man who had made a decision about what he was paying attention to. And finding the right one will be, somewhat more complex than usual. Because of what I am. Harry said. Ollivander looked at him with something between respect and academic delight. Because you are already a conduit for power that most wands spend their entire existence aspiring to channel. The wand must be a complement, not an attempt to contain. He had already begun moving along the shelves with the quick, slightly strange movement that was entirely his. Normally I ask for the wand arm, right, Harry said. And I begin with likely candidates and move toward certainty through process. In your case I suspect we will arrive at certainty rather abruptly. He pulled a box from a shelf with the confidence of someone skipping several steps. But let us observe the form. He presented the wand. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches. Harry took it, and the moment he did there was a sound, not an explosion, not a dramatic flourish of sparks and wind. Something quieter. A note, almost. A single harmonic that was gone before it fully registered, but that left everyone in the shop with the residual feeling of having heard something very true said about someone. Apollo made a small involuntary sound at the doorway. Yes, Ollivander said quietly, looking at Harry with those reflective eyes. That's the one. He paused. Although, curious. The core. He tilted his head. Phoenix feather. From a very specific phoenix. The only other wand I have made from the same bird was used to, well. He looked at Harry's forehead. You know. Yes, Harry said, turning the wand in his fingers. It was warm. Not the wood warm of a handled object but something internal. He could feel it responding, cautiously, the way new things respond when they are uncertain of the scale of what they've found. He let it calibrate to him slowly, without overwhelming it. Apollo's lesson about the wand believing it was leading. Brothers, Harry said. The wand and Voldemort's. Connected, yes, Ollivander said. In the wizarding tradition, brother wands are reluctant to fight one another. He paused. You don't seem concerned by that. The wand is a channel, Harry said, setting the wand down and picking it back up with his left hand, just to feel the difference, and there was one, the right hand was clearly the true fit, but he was gathering information. What it channels is mine. The reluctance is a mechanical issue, not a fundamental one. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. You understand the theory rather better than most of my adult clients, he said. I've had time to study, Harry said. He paid, with Olympian gold that Apollo had thoughtfully converted into galleons, though the conversion rate had been an interesting negotiation, and they left Ollivander's with the wand in Harry's inner pocket, and behind them Harry heard Ollivander sit down in his chair heavily and say, very quietly, to no one, well. That is not what I expected. Gringotts was next. The bank was all cold marble and goblin efficiency and the specific institutional coldness of money taking itself seriously. Harry walked in without hesitation, with Zeus and Apollo behind him, and approached the main desk. The goblin behind it looked up with the precise, flat attention of a creature that evaluated the worth of things for a living. Harry Potter, Harry said. I want to access my vault. And I want a full accounting of the Potter estate. The goblin looked at him. Then, in the brief and involuntary way of things with genuine power sense, its eyes moved to Apollo and Zeus. Then back to Harry. Something shifted in its expression, not warmth, because Gringotts goblins did not trade in warmth, but something that was approximately respect. Identity confirmation, the goblin said. Harry put his hand flat on the desk, and the scar on his forehead pulsed once, a faint silver light, brief and clean. The goblin looked at the reading stone beneath Harry's palm, looked at his screen, and made a note. The Potter vault, the goblin said, has been largely intact since October 1981. There are also, a pause, brief, careful. Several other accounts connected to the Potter name, through inheritance lines, that have not been formally claimed. I'll need the full list, Harry said. Of course, Mr. Potter. Something in the goblin's manner had become precise in a different way, the way of someone dealing with a client who was going to require their actual competence. If you'll come with me. Harry looked back at Apollo and Zeus. Apollo gave him the small, easy nod that meant we're here, we're fine, proceed. Zeus's version of the same nod was slightly more imperial but carried the same message. Harry followed the goblin, and dealt with the Potter estate with the same organized methodical attention he had brought to his intelligence briefing, and when he came out 40 minutes later he had a comprehensive picture of his inheritance and had also, quietly, moved 2 significant financial instruments in ways that would take the ministry's financial monitoring department approximately 3 months to notice and considerably longer to understand. He did not mention this to Apollo or Zeus until they were back on the street. I may have done a thing at Gringotts, he said. What kind of thing? Apollo said. The kind that establishes independent financial infrastructure not accessible to Dumbledore's influence. Zeus stopped walking. Looked at Harry. You did that in 40 minutes during a routine vault access. I had been planning it since we decided I was going to Hogwarts, Harry said. I just needed the access to execute. He paused. Was that too far? Zeus started walking again. No, he said, and said it with the tone of someone who was trying very hard to sound measured and was not entirely succeeding because what was underneath was deeply and uncomplicatedly satisfied. That was not too far. Apollo put one arm around Harry's shoulders briefly, the easy, warm gesture of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Book supplies next, he said. And then I want to go to Flourish and Blots and see what they're using for the defense curriculum. I have opinions. You have opinions about everything, Harry said. Yes, Apollo agreed. That's why my opinions are good. They moved through Diagon Alley, the 3 of them, in the buzzing wake of the crowd's attention, and Harry did something that Apollo had been watching for and was glad to see, he began to look. Not at the people looking at him, but at everything else. The apothecary. The broom shop. The bookstore. The Owl Emporium. He looked at it with genuine curiosity, the wizarding world that had been his designated home and had never been, the culture he was entering and needed to understand, the people who would be his classmates and his context for the next 7 years. He looked at it the way someone looks at a map of a place they are genuinely interested in going. Not with awe. Not with condescension. With the specific alert attention of someone planning to engage seriously. They ate lunch at a small place off the main alley that was not trying to be impressive and was therefore, Apollo had always found, actually better than most of the alternatives. Harry had 3 questions for every 1 bite of food, which was his natural eating to thinking ratio when something had captured his interest. Zeus answered half of them directly and deflected the rest with the kind of skilled partial disclosure that was his primary diplomatic tool. The other students, Harry said, at one point, with a piece of bread in his hand. What do I actually know about who'll be in my year? Hermione Granger, Apollo said immediately, because this was a topic he had developed genuine opinions on. Muggle-born. She is, by every metric I have access to, the most academically accomplished student who will be entering Hogwarts this year. Possibly the most academically accomplished student of her generation. He paused. She is also, by all accounts, somewhat isolated. Very good at knowing things. Less practiced at knowing people. Harry was listening with the focused expression he used for information he intended to use. Ronald Weasley, Zeus said. From an old wizarding family. The 6th of 7 children. He has grown up in the shadow of high-achieving siblings, which has produced a specific kind of personality, capable, occasionally brilliant, but prone to allowing that shadow to define his ceiling for himself. A pause. He is also instinctively loyal. That is not a minor quality. Neville Longbottom, Apollo said. This one is, interesting. His parents were tortured to the point of permanent incapacitation by Bellatrix Lestrange. He has grown up with considerable pressure from his family, who wanted him to prove he was a wizard. He paused. He is one. Substantially so. But he has been told otherwise so consistently that he half believes it. Harry's expression shifted at this, something quiet and specific moved across it. The particular resonance of recognizing a story. I know what that is, he said, quietly. I know you do, Apollo said. And Malfoy, Zeus said. Draco Malfoy. Son of Lucius Malfoy, who was a Death Eater and escaped Azkaban by claiming coercion. The Malfoy family's entire social architecture is built on a hierarchy of blood status that your existence categorically disproves. He met Harry's eyes. Draco will come at you with everything he has been raised to be. Prejudice, performance, the reflexive aggression of someone whose identity depends on being at the top of a specific order. And? Harry said. And he is 10 years old and has been taught to be exactly what he is, Zeus said. That is worth remembering. Harry considered this. You're not saying I should be easy on him. I'm saying he is not the person he was raised to be, Zeus said. Whether he ever figures that out is his problem. But don't close the door before he has a chance to try. Harry ate his bread, looking at the middle distance with the particular focused expression of someone storing things carefully. Okay, he said. I'll remember. There is one more name, Apollo said. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore will seek you out, Apollo said. Directly, personally, and quickly. He will be, charming, warm, and very carefully trying to understand what you have become and whether any version of his original plan can be salvaged. He paused. He will underestimate how much you know about what he intended. And when he realizes you know, he will shift strategies without announcing it. What's his current theory about me? Harry asked. We don't know precisely, Apollo admitted. He knows you weren't with the Dursleys. He knows someone with power intervened. He does not know about Zeus and myself specifically, or rather, he suspects divine involvement but has been unwilling to commit to that hypothesis because it doesn't fit the world as he understands it. Harry smiled slightly. A man who doesn't believe in things that don't fit his model, he said. He believes, Apollo said. He simply compartmentalizes. He's very good at making the uncomfortable idea take up less space than it deserves. So he'll meet me, Harry said, and he'll try to assess whether I'm still usable. And I'll let him make his assessment. He picked up his drink. And then we'll both know where we stand. Zeus looked across the table at his son, and there was no other word for it at this point. There had not been another word for it since approximately year 2 when Zeus had stopped thinking of this as an intervention and started thinking of it as a family, and felt the specific complicated feeling of watching someone you love move towards something difficult with their eyes completely open. You're ready, Zeus said. Not a question. Harry looked at him with green eyes that held the light the way his mother's had, and with an expression that was entirely his own. I've been ready, he said, for a long time. Outside the small restaurant in Diagon Alley, the crowd continued its busy self-important motion, and somewhere in the bank they had just left, a goblin was filing a report about the Potter account access with the specific attentive efficiency of someone who had noticed something significant, and somewhere in a headmaster's office in Scotland, a collection of magical instruments were responding to a new set of readings with behavior that their owner was going to find, in approximately 3 hours, extremely difficult to explain. And Harry Potter sat across from the 2 most powerful beings in his world, eating lunch in the sun, and planned the next 7 years. Chapter 3, The Letter and the Lightning. The Hogwarts Express left from King's Cross at 11 in the morning, which meant that by 9:30, the station was already doing that particular September 1st thing, families moving in urgent clusters, trolleys loaded with trunks and cages, the specific electric tension of 100 children simultaneously beginning something new. Harry walked through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without breaking stride. He had his trunk, packed by himself, methodically, with the same organized precision he brought to intelligence briefing and strategic planning, which meant it contained exactly what he needed and nothing decorative except for a single photograph that Apollo had given him the night before. In the photograph, The three of them stood at the edge of Apollo's training ground in the late afternoon gold of an Olympian evening. Zeus had his arms crossed and was looking at the camera with an expression that was probably meant to be neutral and was transparently, helplessly proud. Apollo had one arm around Harry and was mid-laugh at something. Harry was looking at neither of them, looking slightly off-camera, with an expression that was so entirely himself, alert, warm, already thinking about something else, that when Apollo had handed him the photograph that morning Harry had looked at it for a long, quiet moment before folding it carefully and putting it in his shirt pocket. His owl, a tawny bird named Helios, because Harry had at age 7 declared that he was allowed to be obvious about some things, rode in a cage on the trolley and was conducting herself with the dignified composure of a creature who had grown up on Olympus and found a train station perfectly manageable. The platform was everything his briefings had suggested, chaotic, warm, loud, and shot through with the specific quality of the wizarding world doing its ordinary version of itself. Steam from the Scarlet Engine. The smell of magic and packed lunches. Families saying goodbye with the calibrated emotion of people who had done this several times and had the ritual down. Harry moved through it, reading it, absorbing the texture of this world that was his by birth and had never been his in practice. He had been on the platform for approximately 40 seconds before someone recognized him. It was a boy his age, round-faced, brown-haired, with an expression of permanent mild worry that Harry recognized immediately from Zeus's briefing. Neville Longbottom stood beside a formidable elderly woman in green robes, and was in the process of receiving last-minute instructions about something when his eyes landed on Harry's forehead and went very round. Harry caught his eye, gave him a small nod, easy, direct, the kind that means yes, I see you too rather than yes, please treat me differently, and kept moving toward the train. The second recognition happened in a cluster near the front carriage. A red-haired family, large and unmistakable, 6 visible children at various heights, a broad-shouldered father, a warm-faced mother currently kissing the youngest boy on the head with a thoroughness that suggested she did not care who was watching. The youngest boy had the specific embarrassed quality of someone experiencing affection in public, and he was in the process of escape when he turned and found himself face to face with Harry. Ronald Weasley had very blue eyes and a face that was not good at hiding what was happening in it. What was happening in it right now was recognition, shock, recalibration, and a desperate attempt to look like none of those things were occurring simultaneously. Ron said. Hi, Harry said. Ron Weasley. Ron went slightly redder than his hair. Yeah. Yeah. He swallowed. Harry Potter. Yes, Harry said. Are you going to the same compartment I am, or, I don't know which compartment you're going to, Ron said, and then immediately looked like he wished he hadn't said that. Neither do I yet, Harry said. So we're in the same position. Want to find one together? Ron's expression cycled through several more things in quick succession. He looked briefly back at his family. His mother was watching with an expression of delighted maternal conspiracy, his eldest brothers were watching with expressions of frank curiosity. Then he looked back at Harry and said, yeah, all right, with the studied casualness of someone extremely pleased and trying not to show it. They found a compartment near the middle of the train that was empty except for a toad sitting on the seat looking philosophically resigned to life. Harry recognized the toad from his briefings, Trevor, belonging to Neville Longbottom, who apparently lost him on a near-daily basis. He put Helios's cage on the overhead rack, settled his trunk, and sat down. Your family not seeing you off? Ron asked, settling his own trunk with slightly less efficiency. They said goodbye at home, Harry said. Which was true. Apollo had made breakfast, actual breakfast, the full spread that Harry had privately decided he was going to miss most about Olympus, though he would not have said so, and they had sat together for 2 hours in the morning gold of the palace with the specific unhurried quality of people who understood they were not going to see each other for several months and were not performing their feelings about that but simply sitting with them. Zeus had not said anything particularly significant. He had drunk his coffee and read his correspondence and occasionally looked at Harry across the table, and when Harry had finally stood to leave, Zeus had put his hand on Harry's shoulder for a moment, that brief, weight-carrying gesture, and said, right. Harry had said, "You'll know everything before the letter arrives." Zeus had said, "Write anyway." He had written it before he even boarded the train, a single page that was currently folded in his pocket next to the photograph. They didn't come to the station. Ron was saying, with the curiosity of someone from a large family for whom showing up collectively to everything was simply the natural order. They came to Diagon Alley, Harry said, and let that sit there, because the version of events where Apollo and Zeus walked through King's Cross Station would have created a significantly more complicated morning than Harry currently had bandwidth for. Ron seemed to decide not to push it. He had the good instinct, Harry noticed, of knowing when someone had given him a complete answer that contained less than everything. "Are you really, I mean? You're Harry Potter." He caught himself. "Sorry. My mum says I shouldn't make it weird." "It's not weird," Harry said. "You're the first person I've introduced myself to in the wizarding world." "That's interesting, not weird." Ron looked at him for a moment with those readable blue eyes. "You're not, I thought you'd be different," he said. "Everyone always talks about you like you're, I dunno, a marble statue of something." "I'm not a marble statue," Harry said. "No," Ron agreed, with a slight grin that transformed his face entirely. "You're eating crisps." Harry had, in fact, pulled a bag of crisps from his pocket. He held them out. Ron took a handful with the ease of someone who had never met a snack he wasn't interested in, and the particular tension that had been in the compartment since they sat down bled off into something considerably more ordinary and considerably more real. The door slid open 20 minutes into the journey. Hermione Granger stood in the doorway with the specific energy of someone who had already looked in 4 other compartments and was now conducting this search with methodical rather than hopeful intent. Her hair was in a state that suggested strong opinions about direction and no consensus. She had a large book under her arm that she was clearly not reading but carrying in the way people carry things that are part of their identity. Her eyes moved from Ron to Harry, and the move from Harry to the scar was too fast to be fully controlled. But what happened after was interesting. She pulled herself back from the recognition response with a visible effort, straightened, and said, "Have any of you seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville Longbottom lost his." "He's on that seat," Harry said, nodding to where Trevor was sitting. Hermione's eyes went to the toad, to Harry, to the toad again. She crossed the compartment, picked up Trevor with the competent handling of someone who had done prior research on toad retrieval, and then appeared to make a decision. She sat down. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said, with the directness of someone who had decided that compartment changing in the corridor was socially inefficient. "You're Harry Potter. You're Ron Weasley." She looked at Ron briefly, apparently having done background research. "I've read about you, obviously, your family's mentioned in Hogwarts, a history. Your brothers Fred and George are in the chapter on the most notable pranks of the 20th century." Ron opened his mouth, apparently uncertain whether to be proud or mortified. "And you," she said, turning to Harry with the expression of someone about to ask something they have been holding in for a while, "went missing when you were 1, and Dumbledore has been publicly and privately concerned about it for nearly a decade, and I would very much like to know where you actually were, but I imagine you're not going to tell me." Harry looked at her for a moment. He liked her immediately and completely, which was not a slow-building thing but an immediate recognition, the way you recognize a specific kind of intelligence, the kind that is always slightly hungry for more than it currently has. "Not today," he said. "Ask me again when we've known each other a week." She appeared to find this an acceptable timeline. "All right," she said, and opened her book. Harry caught Ron's expression, a mixture of slight wariness and the dawning recognition that this was going to be an interesting year, and gave him the small private nod that meant yes, I know, it's fine. The train arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the deep blue of early evening, and the path from station to castle was the lake and the boats and the sky full of more stars than a normal English sky should contain. Harry sat in his boat with Hermione on his left and Neville on his right. The toad had been delivered and Neville had attached himself to their group with the cautious hope of someone who didn't expect to be allowed to stay and was waiting for the other shoe, and looked at Hogwarts the way he looked at the intelligence parchments and the training ground and the Diagon Alley crowd. It was genuinely impressive. He could feel the magic in it, old and layered, centuries of accumulation, the specific density of a place that had been the site of enormous things for a very long time. The wards were exceptional. Whoever had built them, and rebuilt them, and added to them across multiple generations, had understood magic at a structural level. The castle was a work, in the most serious sense of the word. He could also feel, underneath the layers, the specific quality of something watching. Not hostile. Curious. The castle itself, or the intelligence that ran through it, Hogwarts, whatever that meant when it was not a school but a presence, seemed to notice him. He noticed it back. You can feel the wards, Hermione said, quietly, from beside him. She had her hand in the water off the side of the boat and her expression was the one she wore when she was tracking several things simultaneously. Yes, Harry said. They're extraordinary, she said. The layering, there must be 50 different enchantments operating simultaneously. The primary ward is protection keyed, but there are information wards underneath that, and below that some kind of, she stopped. Can you read the lower layers? Harry looked at the castle and considered giving her a diplomatic answer. Then reconsidered. There's a monitoring enchantment keyed to blood status, he said. Probably 600 years old. And beneath that, something older. Pre-Hogwarts, I think. Whatever was on this land before they built. Hermione stared at him. How are you reading that? Different kind of sensing, Harry said, without elaborating. What's your count on the protection wards? She narrowed her eyes, not in suspicion, in competition. 47 distinct active enchantments, she said. Possibly more in the West Wing. You. 53, Harry said. The East Tower has 4 separate ones that are so old they've partially merged. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the specific tone of someone recalibrating their competition target upward, right. So you're going to be a challenge. Is that a problem? Harry asked. Absolutely not, she said, and pulled her hand out of the water, and looked at the castle with the expression of someone who had just found out the library was larger than they thought. The sorting was done with a hat that sang and then spoke privately, the mechanics of which Harry found genuinely interesting from a magical engineering perspective. He sat in the line of first years waiting for his name and watched the hat work, reading the quality of each sorting with the attention he gave to all things involving power and intent. By the time Harry was called, the hall was already quieter than it had been for any other name. He had felt the recognition spread through the room in the boat, on the grounds, in the entry hall, that same rippling attention he had walked through in Diagon Alley, the crowd's understanding that the thing they had been told about for a decade was now physically present. He sat on the stool and the hat dropped over his eyes. The inside of the hat was dark in the way of things that contain more than their exterior suggests. He felt it begin to read, a light pressure, the touch of something intelligent moving through his surface thoughts toward the deeper architecture. Then it stopped. Oh, said the hat. Hello, Harry said, which was not a thing anyone had said to the hat in a considerable time. The hat seemed to reassemble itself around this information. You're not what I was expecting. No, Harry agreed. I imagine not. There's another pause. The hat had a quality of voice that suggested it had sorted thousands of students and had a comprehensive model of human variation and was currently encountering a data point outside that model. There's something here that isn't wizard-born power. It's divine, Harry said. Yes, the hat said. I'm seeing several things simultaneously. There's Gryffindor in you, absolutely, the courage is foundational, it's not performed, it's in the bedrock. But there's also, the strategic mind is extraordinary. Slytherin would want you. And the intellectual curiosity, that Ravenclaw appetite for, it paused again. You don't fit a house. You're larger than the categories. Then put me where I'd do the most good, Harry said. That's not, the hat started, and then stopped. Most students want to know where they belong. I know where I belong, Harry said, without arrogance, just clarity. I'm asking where I should be. A long pause. The hat was doing something, Harry could feel it, the sense of a complex calculation running, and underneath that, something very old in the fabric of the hat itself responding to something very old in Harry in a way that was less sorting and more recognition. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it on the stool with the neat-handed care he brought to all significant objects, and walked to the Gryffindor table with the even, unhurried step that was simply how he moved. He sat down. Hermione was sorted 3 names later, also Gryffindor, and she slid in beside him with a slightly dazed expression that suggested the hat had said things to her as well. Ron arrived from the Weasley contingent 2 spots behind, and then Neville, who sat down with the expression of someone who had been given an answer they hadn't dared to hope for. Harry noticed, from across the hall, that Draco Malfoy had been sorted Slytherin, and that Draco was watching him from the green and silver table with an expression that was a complicated mixture of things. Harry read it quickly, catalogued it, filed it. Not dismissed it. Zeus's words at lunch in Diagon Alley sat where Zeus's words generally sat, in the load-bearing section of Harry's thinking. The feast appeared, and Harry ate, and talked, and listened to the specific music of a room full of children beginning something. He was doing what Apollo had asked him to do, meeting them where they were. Not performing it. Actually doing it, because the honest truth was that he found them interesting, their varying kinds of intelligence, their specific individual qualities, the ways that people who were entirely human were entirely fascinating when you actually paid attention. So where were you? Said a girl across the table, red-haired, freckled, with the specific color in her cheeks of someone who had worked up to a question and was committed now. Everyone's been wondering. Dumbledore never, my family took me, Harry said. He had his answer ready, not because it was a deflection, but because it was true and it was sufficient. I grew up with them. I'm sorry the wizarding world was worried. Your family, the girl pressed. The Dursleys? But they said, the report said, not the Dursleys, Harry said. My family. She looked at him with the specific confusion of someone encountering an answer that doesn't fit the established story. Harry gave her the small, final smile that meant that's all I'm offering on this particular question, and turned back to his plate, and after a moment the conversation moved on in the natural way of conversations at crowded tables. Hermione, beside him, had caught the exchange. He could feel her filing it, the specific mental motion of someone adding a data point to a growing collection. He said nothing about it. She would either ask directly or wait, and either approach was fine with him. At the head table, Professor Dumbledore sat in the headmaster's chair and had been, Harry was certain, watching him since the sorting. Harry had not looked directly at the head table. He did not need to. He had felt the quality of Dumbledore's attention the way you feel sunlight after a door opens, unmistakable, and carrying its own information. Dumbledore was old in the way that very powerful people got old, the power was still fully present, burning steady behind the elaborate performance of the grandfather persona, the half-moon glasses and twinkling eyes and candy-offering bonhomie. Harry could read it without effort. The whole confection of benevolent wisdom was genuine in some respects and deliberate in others, and the deliberate parts were working very hard right now as Dumbledore assessed the things sitting at the Gryffindor table and revised what he thought he knew. Harry turned his head, slowly, and met Dumbledore's eyes directly. He held the gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to be intentional, not long enough to be a challenge, and then returned to his conversation with Ron about Quidditch, which Ron was explaining with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had found his best subject. At the head table, Dumbledore reached for a lemon drop and was still. Quirrell was at the end of the staff table, which was where Harry had expected him to be. He looked, at first assessment, unremarkable, thin, anxious-looking, with a turban that was several sizes too emphatic for the rest of him. He had the particular quality of someone existing in 2 states simultaneously, and the friction between those states was doing visible things to his nervous system. Harry had looked at him once during the feast, briefly, the kind of glance that appeared casual and wasn't. What he had felt in that glance was complex. The man underneath was still there, barely, pressed into a corner of himself by something that occupied the rest of the space. What occupied the rest was cold and purposeful and very, very old in the way of things that had decided to be immortal and were paying the ongoing costs of that decision. Harry had looked away. He had not tensed, not shuddered, not shown anything. He had looked, gathered the information, filed it, and gone back to his food. The scar on his forehead had pulsed once, very faint, a private notification, and gone quiet. Voldemort was in that room. Harry ate his dessert. The dormitory that night was the specific chaos of 5 boys discovering they were going to share a space indefinitely. Harry unpacked with efficiency while the others navigated the organizational challenges of 6 years of varying personal standards meeting a single room. He had the bed by the window, which he had chosen without explaining that he had a long habit of sleeping with skyview, and he sat on its edge while the others wound down, and looked out at the grounds in the dark. Hogwarts at night was different. The magic in the walls was quieter but not diminished, if anything it was more distinct, the way music is clearer when the background noise drops. He could feel the castle in a way that was not hostile or passive but something between, interested. As though the building itself was cross-referencing what it knew about Harry Potter against what had just walked through its doors. "You're not sleeping," Ron said, from the next bed. His voice had the half-muffled quality of someone talking through a pillow. "Not yet," Harry said. "You all right?" Harry considered this. "Yes," he said. "Just thinking." "About what?" Harry looked at the window. "Whether this year is going to go the way I expect it to or more interestingly." Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, are those different options, for you? Interesting and expected? "Generally, no," Harry said. A pause. "Harry?" "Yes." "The sorting," Ron said, carefully. "The hat took a long time with you. Longer than anyone else." "It did," Harry said. "What did it?" Ron stopped himself. Reconsidered. Harry could almost hear him doing it, the instinct to ask a personal question running into the good manners his mother had installed. "Never mind," Ron said. "Good night." "Good night," Harry said. He looked at the grounds a while longer. Below, the lake was absolutely still in the dark, and the forbidden forest at the edge of the grounds had a quality that was not quite the divine wild of the places he had grown up with but was not entirely different either. Something lived in it that was large and attentive and entirely untamable, and Harry found this comfortable in the familiar way of someone who had always lived near things larger than themselves. He took out the letter he'd written on the train and read it through once. He had already sent it with Helios. It would be there by now, or close. He could feel Helios somewhere above, that connection between wizard and owl that was apparently a magical thing but that in Harry's case had the warm specific quality of a relationship with an individual creature. He folded the letter back up, put it with the photograph in the drawer of the nightstand, and lay down. The castle settled around him with the sound of a very large and very old thing doing what it had always done, accommodating one more person in its long history of accommodation. The magic in the walls did its quiet thing. Harry closed his eyes. Dumbledore did not wait as long as Harry had expected. 3 days into term, on a Thursday, Harry was crossing the courtyard on the way back from Charms when a note materialized in his robe pocket. He didn't take it out immediately. He finished walking with Hermione, who was mid-sentence about the theory behind Wingardium Leviosa and whether the specific wand motion was strictly necessary or simply the most efficient default path, and he let her finish her thought. It was a good thought. She had already independently arrived at a distinction it had taken Apollo a decade to teach formally, and then said he'd see her at lunch and went to find the staircase to Dumbledore's office. The office was exactly what it would be. A room built by someone who understood how spaces perform their occupant, circular, warm, full of interesting objects, designed to make visitors feel welcomed and slightly overwhelmed by the accumulated significance around them. The portraits of previous headmasters slept or pretended to. The various magical instruments clicked and spun with the industry of things with jobs to do. Behind the desk, Dumbledore sat with the easy authority of someone who spent most of their professional life in this chair and had arranged the room to be an extension of themselves. The phoenix on the perch looked at Harry. Harry looked at the phoenix. The phoenix made a sound that was not quite a trill, something softer and more uncertain, the way birds respond to the presence of something that doesn't fit their existing categories. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice was real. Harry could read the difference, and this was genuine, tempered by an existing alongside the other things in the room, but the warmth itself was real. "Please sit down." Harry sat. "I've been looking for you," Dumbledore said, "for some years now." "I know," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes moved over him with the precision of a man who had lived long enough to read people the way other people read sentences. Harry let him look. He had nothing to hide and no reason to perform discomfort he wasn't feeling. "You are," Dumbledore said carefully, "not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Harry asked, with genuine curiosity. "A child shaped by a particular set of experiences," Dumbledore said. He folded his hands on the desk. The rings on his fingers, one of them, Harry noted, a specific ring that had an energy to it he'd need to examine more closely later, caught the light. A child who had grown up in the ordinary world, who was about to encounter the extraordinary for the first time. Who would need guidance, context, someone to help him understand his place in a very complex situation. And instead, Harry said. "Instead," Dumbledore said, with a rueful quality that was not entirely performance, "you sit across from me at 10 years old and seem to understand the situation as well as I do." A pause. "Possibly better, in some respects." "Not better," Harry said. "Differently. You know things I don't. The internal politics of the wizarding world, the specific individuals, the history you've lived through rather than studied." He paused. "I know other things." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I imagine you do." His eyes did the twinkling thing. Harry had been warned about the twinkling, and it was real, not entirely performed, but used deliberately. "Would you like to tell me where you've been?" "With my family," Harry said. "Your aunt and uncle are, not my family," Harry said. "My family. The one that found me." He held Dumbledore's gaze steadily. "You left me on their doorstep in October 1981. You know that I wasn't there when you checked. You've spent 9 years trying to find me. Now you have." He paused. "What did you want to tell me?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The fire in the grate crackled. Outside, far below, the grounds were visible through the high windows, green and gold in the September light. The old man looked at Harry with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, all of them controlled, and Harry watched him make a decision. "There is a prophecy," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. "A beat. You know. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches," Harry said, in the even tone he used for things he'd memorized and processed and decided what to do with. "Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not." He paused. "And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." He looked at Dumbledore. "That prophecy." Dumbledore had gone very still. "How do you know the full text?" "The same way I know that Voldemort is currently attached to Professor Quirrell," Harry said, and watched, with the precise attention of someone reading a battlefield, the sequence of reactions move through Dumbledore's face. Shock. Rapid recalculation. Assessment. "And the same way I know about the Philosopher's Stone in the 3rd-floor corridor." The silence in the office was the specific kind that happens when a very controlled person is doing the internal equivalent of running to catch something they've dropped. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was different now, still warm, but the grandfatherly performance had thinned enough that what was underneath was visible, a very powerful, very intelligent man taking a genuine threat assessment seriously. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm planning to attend school," Harry said. Study. Learn the wizarding curriculum. Make friends. He paused. And deal with Voldemort before he can use the stone to regenerate, because leaving him in a building full of children while he works toward a body is bad strategy. You should leave the stone to me, Dumbledore said. The protections are designed for a specific type of student to navigate, Harry said. I know. They're well made. But they were designed as a contingency for a reactive situation, not a planned engagement. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I'm not going to be reactive. You are 10 years old, Dumbledore said, and there was something genuine in it, the specific worry of someone who cares, not performing concern. Yes, Harry said. And I've been trained for this for 9 years by people who are considerably better at it than anyone in this school. He said it plainly, without challenge. I'm not dismissing the risk. I'm assessing it accurately. There's a difference. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk for a long moment. The fire crackled. The phoenix on the perch had moved, subtly, a small shift of posture, angled toward Harry the way warm things turn toward other warm things. The power the Dark Lord knows not, Dumbledore said slowly. In the prophecy. Yes, Harry said. I had always believed it referred to love, Dumbledore said. Your mother's sacrifice. The protection it created. It might, Harry said. It also might refer to something considerably more literal. He stood up, because the conversation had reached its natural end point and he had a transfiguration class in 20 minutes. I'll keep you informed, Professor. Of what I find, and what I decide to do about it. A pause. I think that's a better arrangement than the alternative. The alternative being, clearly, Harry doing things Dumbledore had no visibility on. The old man heard it, turned it over, arrived at the same conclusion Harry had arrived at, which was that informed was better than not. Yes, Dumbledore said. I think it might be. He studied Harry for another moment. You have your mother's eyes, he said, and this was entirely unguarded, the emotion behind it old and real and nothing to do with strategy. I know, Harry said, quietly. Then, she died protecting me. I know that too. He held Dumbledore's gaze for a moment. I don't intend to let that cost go to waste. He left. In the corridor outside, he stood for a moment in the cool stone air and took a breath that was steadier than the inside of the office had been. Not because he'd been afraid. He hadn't been. But Dumbledore was, the man was something. Genuinely extraordinary, genuinely complex, genuinely well-intentioned in ways that made him more difficult to navigate than someone simply malicious would have been. Harry had felt the weight of him in that room, the accumulated decades of intelligence and power and absolute certainty about the way the world worked and his role in it. He had also felt the exact moment that certainty had developed a crack. He walked to Transfiguration, and by the time he arrived his expression was entirely ordinary, and Hermione was already there, sitting in the front row with her notes open, and she looked up at him and said, "You were with Dumbledore." "Yes," he said, sitting beside her. "How was it?" Harry considered the question with the honest attention it deserved. "Educational," he said. "For both of us, I think." Hermione studied him for a moment with those sharp, hungry eyes. "He had a plan for you," she said. "Didn't he? Whatever happened when you were a baby, there was a plan." Harry looked at her, at this girl who had been in his life for 3 days and had already independently located the important question through pure intelligence and the instinct to push at things that didn't fit neatly. He liked her so specifically and completely. "Yes," he said. He did. "And the plan changed," Harry said. 9 years ago." She nodded, once, in the decisive way she had. "Right," she said. "And now?" "Now," Harry said, as Professor McGonagall entered the room and the class came to order, "we study Transfiguration." Hermione gave him a look that said very clearly that this conversation was not finished and she intended to return to it at the earliest available opportunity. Harry gave her the look that said just as clearly that he knew, and he would let her, and he was looking forward to it. McGonagall stood at the front of the room and said, "Before we begin, I want to be clear that transfiguration is among the most complex magical disciplines you will study here. Do not expect it to be simple, and do not be discouraged when it is not." She looked around the room with the comprehensive professional attention of someone who had been doing this for decades. Her eyes stopped briefly on Harry, the same assessment everyone gave him, the forehead, the scar, the face check, and moved on without stalling. She set a match on her desk and turned it into a needle. Then she looked at the class. "Your turn," she said. Harry looked at the match in front of him. He could feel the structure of it, the molecular arrangement, the specific properties of the material, what he was being asked to do to it. He picked up his wand, thought about Apollo's instruction, make the wand believe it's leading, and performed the incantation. The match became a needle. McGonagall turned from where she was walking between desks and looked at it. Then at Harry. Her expression went through the same sequence that Ollivander's had: recognition, assessment, recalibration. She picked up the needle between two fingers, examined it, set it down. "Correct," she said, in the voice of someone who was going to revisit this privately at a later time, and moved on down the row. Hermione was still working on hers, her brow furrowed with the intensity of someone attacking a problem they were not willing to be beaten by. Harry said nothing, did not offer help, let her work, and 3 minutes later heard the small sound of success and looked over to find her holding a perfect needle with an expression of fierce satisfaction. She glanced at him. He gave her the small acknowledging nod. She gave it back. Outside the Transfiguration classroom windows, the Scottish sky was doing the September thing, enormous and grey and lit from within by the particular quality of northern light. Hogwarts settled around them with the sound of its ordinary busy self, 1,000 years of the same work continuing. Somewhere in the castle, in a fourth-floor office, Dumbledore sat at his desk with his hands folded and looked at nothing in particular and thought about a 10-year-old who had walked in knowing the full text of the prophecy and walked out having told him, in polite and total terms, that the plan had changed. Somewhere below the third-floor corridor, something old and dangerous and enormously patient sat behind a series of obstacles and waited. And Harry Potter sat in Transfiguration and learned the curriculum of the wizarding world with the genuine interested attention of someone who had decided that knowing everything was not optional, and in the margin of his notes, in the small precise handwriting Apollo had taught him, wrote a single line he would come back to later. Brother Wands. Find the workaround. Chapter 4. The sorting of a Sun Prince. The first week of Hogwarts had a rhythm to it that Harry mapped quickly, not because it was complicated, but because understanding the shape of a place was the first thing Zeus had ever taught him, and the habit was by now completely automatic. Breakfast was the best intelligence-gathering time. The hall in the morning had a looseness to it that disappeared by midday. People sat in their natural clusters, talked without the performance they applied to public spaces later in the day, and the general noise level provided enough cover that conversations at his table were private without effort. He used it. Not cynically, he was genuinely interested in the people around him, in the texture of their lives and the specific kinds of intelligence they carried, but with purpose, because interest and purpose were not contradictory. He knew within 4 days that Seamus Finnegan's explosive tendencies with spellwork were not carelessness but the result of an instinctive overcharge that nobody had ever taught him to regulate. He knew that Neville Longbottom, who had introduced himself with the apologetic posture of someone expecting to be a burden, was reading 3 textbooks ahead of the class syllabus in private and pretending he wasn't. He knew that Ron Weasley processed complex problems best through conversation rather than reading, and that this was not a deficit but a different architecture of intelligence that the formal academic structure of Hogwarts would consistently fail to accommodate. He also knew, by the end of that week, that someone was watching him. Not Dumbledore, whose attention he could track by now. The old man had been careful since their meeting, respectful of the arrangement Harry had proposed, checking in through the specific magical instruments in his office rather than direct observation. Not the staff, though McGonagall watched him with the alert interest of someone who had decided she was going to understand this student properly or die trying. This was different. More furtive. Coming from the Slytherin table at meals, from the edges of corridors during class transitions, from the stands during the brief flying lesson that had, he acknowledged to himself with some internal amusement, not been particularly revelatory for someone who had spent the last 9 years doing things with the air that a broom could not have managed. Draco Malfoy was watching him with the specific quality of someone conducting an assessment and not yet ready to deliver its results. Harry had noticed on the first night and said nothing. He let Malfoy watch. He was not going to perform discomfort he didn't feel for the convenience of someone working up to a confrontation, and he was also, genuinely, not in a hurry. Zeus's word sat in him, 10 years old, taught to be exactly what he is. He held that alongside the observable facts, the studied arrogance, the reflexive cruelty to those Malfoy judged below him, the way he moved through the school like someone asserting a claim, and arrived at the same conclusion he arrived at every morning when he thought about it. He was going to wait. The confrontation found him on a Saturday morning in the second week, in the library. Harry was at a table in the back with 3 books open and a scroll of notes that was approaching comprehensive, working through the theoretical framework of occlumency. He had found the section in the library on mind magic the previous Wednesday, and the whole structure of it had interested him immediately, not because he needed the defensive application, but because the theory of how minds built their own architecture was genuinely fascinating, and he had the specific academic appetite that, once engaged, was very difficult to put down. Hermione was at the same table, 4 feet to his right, working through a supplementary text on charms theory that was 3 years ahead of the curriculum. She had been there for 2 hours. They had exchanged approximately 6 words in that time and were both entirely comfortable with this. The chair across from Harry scraped back. Malfoy sat down with the ease of someone who had decided this territory was his, and put his hands flat on the table, and looked at Harry with pale grey eyes that were performing a very specific emotion. Harry looked up from his notes. "Potter," Malfoy said. "Malfoy," Harry said, and went back to his notes. A beat. Malfoy had not been expecting that. The return to reading was not in his script. "I've been watching you," he said. "I know," Harry said, without looking up. Another beat, longer. Malfoy recalibrated. "You're not like what everyone said," he said, and there was something genuine in it, the specific honesty that comes out in people when their current approach has lost its footing. "Everyone said you'd be, they all expected you to walk in here like you were already better than everyone. Like the famous Harry Potter who survived you-know-who. But you don't act like that." Harry looked up from his notes at that. He studied Malfoy across the table, the boy who had been raised to be the apex of a specific hierarchy and who was now sitting in a library approaching someone he'd been told to look down on, because the someone in question was not behaving in a way that made looking down on them feel structurally possible. He looked genuinely uncertain, beneath the performance. Like someone who had been given a map that didn't match the terrain. "You thought I'd be easy to place," Harry said. "You had a category for me." Malfoy's jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't say that. You've been watching me for 10 days to figure out what category I belong in," Harry said, not unkindly. "And you haven't been able to." He set down his quill. "So now you're here." Across the table, Hermione had stopped reading, though she was maintaining the performance of reading with the specific absorbed expression she used when she was paying full attention to something that was not the book in front of her. Malfoy looked at Harry for a moment. Something was happening behind his eyes, a more complicated process than his surface performance suggested. He was not, Harry observed, stupid. He was performing stupidity in certain ways, the stupidity of someone who hadn't needed to develop particular skills because their social position had made those skills seem unnecessary. But the underlying intelligence was there and it was real. "My father said," Malfoy started, and then stopped. "What did your father say?" Harry asked. Malfoy looked at him. "That you'd be manageable," he said, quietly. "That a boy who grew up away from our world would be ignorant. Easy to guide." He paused. "That the right families could position themselves around you. Use the connection to rebuild the standing that was lost after the war." He stopped again. His voice had been going somewhere he hadn't planned. Harry watched him. He did not fill the silence, did not offer Malfoy an easier exit. He waited, because the important thing was being said and interrupting it would have been wrong. "But you're not manageable," Malfoy said. It came out almost like an accusation. "You know things. You move like, you're different in a way nobody here knows how to explain. And you haven't done anything to make it clear where you stand. Which means nobody knows what you are." He looked at Harry with the raw directness of someone who has been trying various indirect approaches and run out of them. "So what are you?" Harry looked at him for a long moment. "Honest answer." Harry said. "Yes," Malfoy said, and meant it. "I'm someone who doesn't fit your father's plan," Harry said. "Or Dumbledore's plan. Or the story the wizarding world has been telling about me for 10 years. He met Malfoy's eyes steadily. "I'm not interested in being positioned around, and I'm not interested in playing politics for anyone's benefit but my own. But I'm also," he paused. "I'm also not your enemy, unless you make me one. And the choice about that is yours, not mine." Malfoy stared at him. "That's genuinely what I think," Harry said. "I don't have a hidden version. I find that hidden versions waste a lot of time." A long silence. Hermione was still performing the reading. Then Malfoy said, "Everyone in Slytherin thinks you're going to be a problem." "They're probably right," Harry said. "Snape," Malfoy started, and then seemed to reconsider. "What about Professor Snape?" Harry asked. "He doesn't trust you," Malfoy said. He was loyal to the Dark Lord. Before. And then he wasn't. And now," he shook his head slightly. "He watches you like he's waiting for you to become something." "He watches everyone like that," Harry said. "That's his default." Malfoy almost smiled. It was very small and very fast and then gone, but it was real. He stood up from the table, pushed the chair back in, and looked at Harry for another moment. "Potter," he said. "Malfoy," Harry said. "My father's going to hear about you," Malfoy said. "Whatever I tell him." "I know," Harry said. "I'm going to tell him you're more complicated than he expected," Malfoy said. It was, Harry understood, as close to "I'm not going to set you up" as Malfoy currently had the vocabulary for. "That's accurate," Harry said. Malfoy left. Harry looked at his notes for a moment, then at Hermione, who had abandoned the performance of reading and was now looking at him with the specific expression she used when she just watched something happen that she wanted to understand fully. "You were nice to him," she said. "Not accusingly. Analytically." "I was honest with him," Harry said. "That's different." "He's been making Neville's life difficult since the first day," Hermione said. "In potions he knocked Neville's cauldron and Snape blamed Neville for it." He laughed. "I know," Harry said. "I was there." "You didn't say anything." "It wasn't the right moment," Harry said. "The right moment is coming." He picked up his quill. "Malfoy just told me something useful. His father is already trying to manage the situation. That means Lucius Malfoy is paying attention, and if Lucius Malfoy is paying attention, the Death Eater network that's still nominally dormant is paying attention, and that means Voldemort has access to information about me that he wouldn't otherwise have." Hermione absorbed this. "So the conversation just now was, both things simultaneously," Harry said. "I meant everything I said to him. And it was also information gathering." He paused. "Most real things are both things simultaneously. That's not a contradiction." Hermione was quiet for a moment, with the expression of someone updating their model. "You think more like a strategist than a 10-year-old, she said. "I've been told that," Harry said. "By who?" "My family," Harry said, and the warmth in his voice when he said it was unguarded and complete, the specific warmth of something deeply true. He went back to his notes. Hermione watched him for another moment, then went back to her charms theory, and the library returned to its quiet working self. The right moment came 3 days later. Potions was Snape's domain in every possible sense, a dungeon classroom that was cold and dim and smelled of complicated things, arranged to feel like a disadvantage if you were not the person running it. Snape himself was exactly what Harry had expected, brilliant, precise, and conducting a sustained performance of authority that was, underneath everything, built on the foundation of someone who had looked into genuine darkness and survived it and was not going to let anyone forget that they were in the presence of a serious person. He was also, very clearly, testing Harry from the first minute. The questions came rapid fire on the first day, a technique Harry recognized as a calibration tool, designed to establish the classroom hierarchy by embarrassing those who couldn't answer and identifying those who could. Most students wilted slightly under it. Hermione's hand went up for everything, which Snape ignored with a systematic consistency that was one of his worst habits. "Potter," Snape said, on the third question of the lesson. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "The draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping draughts known. The combination works because asphodel belongs to the lily family. There's an old morning symbolism in the choice of ingredients that suggests the potion's creator had some literary sensibility. The infusion balance is the tricky part. Too much wormwood and you get an unstable emulsion rather than the suspension you need for effective delivery." Snape looked at him. The classroom was very quiet. "Where would you look?" Snape said, and his voice had shifted slightly, less theatrical now, more interested, the way a genuinely intelligent person sounds when they've decided to engage rather than perform, "if you wanted to find a bezoar." "A goat's stomach," Harry said. "Specifically a ruminant digestive tract, which produces the mineral deposits through the same process that creates gallstones. The Persian word padzar means antidote and is where we get the term. They work against most common poisons by binding to the toxin molecules, though they have limits. They won't counteract synthetic or heavily modified magical poisons." Another pause. Snape's dark eyes were doing the specific assessment that Harry had now seen from enough powerful people to recognize its quality, not hostile, not warm. Purely analytic. Like a craftsman looking at an unfamiliar tool and deciding whether it was well made. "And what," Snape said, very precisely, "is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "Nothing," Harry said. "They're the same plant. Also called aconite. The three names are used interchangeably, though wolfsbane has become the common term since the development of the wolfsbane potion in the 17th century. He paused. "Which is a remarkable piece of brewing, actually. The mechanism for interrupting the lycanthropy transformation cycle while preserving cognitive function is," "Yes," Snape said, cutting him off, not rudely, but with the efficiency of someone who had gathered enough data. He looked at Harry for a moment longer, and something in his expression was unreadable in the specific way that Snape's expressions were unreadable by design. 2 points to Gryffindor. The class moved on. Harry returned to his notes. But he felt, throughout the lesson, the specific quality of Snape's attention, not the theatrical aggression he deployed on most students, but something more careful. More private. Like someone who had seen something they hadn't expected and were deciding what to do about it. The incident with Neville happened near the end of class. They were brewing a simple antidote, a first-year exercise, nothing dramatic. Neville had been working carefully, with the quiet focused attention that came out of him when he stopped expecting to fail and simply worked. Harry, 2 tables away, had been watching the quality of Neville's concentration with the specific satisfaction of watching someone good at something they hadn't been told they were good at. Malfoy was 1 table over. He reached across, casual and deliberate, and nudged Neville's stirring rod. The cauldron hiccuped, the antidote went the wrong color, and Neville made a small sound of dismay and looked at his potion with the expression of someone who had been expecting exactly this. Snape appeared. "Longbottom," he said. "What did you do?" Neville looked at his cauldron. "I don't know, Professor, I was stirring correctly. Incompetence requires no dramatic cause," Snape said, with the precision of someone who had said this kind of thing so many times it had become a reflex. "Drain it and start again. -5 points from Gryffindor." Professor. Harry's voice was even and clear in the dungeon quiet. He did not raise it. He did not have to. Snape turned. Every student in the room turned. Malfoy went very still. Mr. Potter, Snape said, in a tone that carried a significant quantity of "this better be worth my time." Malfoy knocked Neville's stirring rod, Harry said. He said it the way he said everything that was simply true, without drama, without accusation, without the nervous performance that usually accompanied a student challenging a professor. Just the information, delivered plainly. "I saw it." Hermione saw it. He glanced at Hermione, who nodded immediately. "The error in Longbottom's potion is external, not his." The room was extremely quiet. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. Then at Malfoy. Then back at Harry, with the expression of someone running two separate calculations simultaneously. "Mr. Malfoy," Snape said, at last, and there was something in his voice that Harry noted carefully, not the indulgence that Snape was supposed to have toward his Slytherins, but something flatter. More neutral. Like someone making an adjustment. "Is this accurate?" Malfoy held very still. His grey eyes went from Snape to Harry. Harry held his gaze without pressure, without challenge. Just present. "Yes," Malfoy said. The room generated a very specific sound, the collective inhalation of 30 students who had not expected that answer. 5 points from Slytherin," Snape said, in the voice of someone who had made a decision they intended to stand by. "And Mr. Longbottom, your original potion was within tolerance before the interference. You will finish it correctly and receive your grade." He turned back to the room. "Continue." The class continued. Harry went back to his brewing. Beside him, Ron was looking at him with the expression he used when Harry had done something he hadn't seen coming. Harry gave him the small nod that meant "it's fine, keep working." At the end of class, as they filed out, Neville fell into step beside Harry in the corridor. He was quiet for a moment, with the specific quality of someone choosing words carefully. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Harry said. "It was not a performance of virtue. It was the same plain delivery as everything else. You were working correctly. The record should reflect that." Neville looked at him with the wide brown eyes of someone recalibrating. "Malfoy's going to be angry," he said. "Maybe," Harry said. "That's his problem, not yours." He paused. "You know your potion was right before he touched it." Neville looked down at his hands. "I thought it was," he said. "I wasn't sure." "It was," Harry said. "The color was consistent, the viscosity was exactly where it should be. You have good instincts for this. You should trust them." Neville made the face of someone receiving a compliment they have no established mechanism for processing. "You can tell all that just by looking." "I have a good eye for it," Harry said. "You have good hands for it." "That's actually harder." Neville was quiet for another moment, and then he said, with a slight shaky quality of someone taking a step they were not certain of, "Professor Snape's never, I've always thought I was just bad at potions. But I was doing it right today. Wasn't I?" It was not quite a question. "Yes," Harry said. "You were." Neville nodded, once, slowly, with the look of someone picking up a piece of evidence and examining whether it fits a new theory. Harry did not push it further. He walked beside him until the corridor split toward the great hall, and then they went in different directions, and behind them the dungeon was emptying in the natural post-class way of students escaping a confined space. Flying lessons were on Thursday. Madame Hooch was organized, authoritative, and had the specific professional manner of someone who loved what they taught and maintained clear rules about it. She lined them up beside their broomsticks and gave the correct instruction. Harry waited beside his broom and considered the situation. The broom was a school broom, functional, not fast, with the handling characteristics of something designed for institutions rather than performance. He could feel its basic enchantment through the proximity, the simple levitation and directional magic woven into the wood. It would do what he asked. That was fine. Up, Madam Hooch said. Up, 31st year said, with varying results. Harry's broom was in his hand before his voice finished the word, which was not a surprising outcome. He had been moving things with intent since he was 3 years old, but he held it loosely, calibrated the response to broom-specific mechanic rather than the broader manipulation he could have used, and let it be exactly what it was. Neville's broom leaped up and hit him in the face. The lesson continued in the textbook fashion for approximately 10 minutes before Neville, airborne and panicking, began to rise despite clearly not wanting to, and then fell, and broke his wrist, and Madam Hooch took him to the hospital wing with the specific efficiency of someone who had seen this before. She left them on the ground with the instruction not to move. Malfoy, the moment she was out of sight, picked up Neville's remembrall, a small glass ball that Neville had dropped, and rose on his broom with the ease of someone who had been riding since childhood. He held the remembrall up and looked at it with the thin smile of someone who was re-establishing social order after having it disrupted. "Wonder what the dunce forgot," he said. "Put it down, Malfoy," Ron said immediately. He was not subtle about it. This was one of Ron's qualities, the instinctive, uncalculating leap to defense that required no strategic assessment. "Make me, Weasley," Malfoy said, and rose higher. Actually, he looked at the remembrall. "I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to find." He glanced at the roof of the castle with deliberate intention. "If he can get up there." He threw it. Harry was in the air before he consciously made the decision. He was aware, in a distant observing part of his mind, that this was the moment, the one Apollo had described when he talked about precise versus demonstrative. He had a choice here. He could collect the remembrall with the understated ease that was, technically, well within his abilities, simple, quiet, conclusive. But Neville Longbottom was in the hospital wing with a broken wrist and a history of being told he was worthless by the same person currently throwing his property onto a castle roof, and Harry made the other choice. He went fast. Not the broom fast of a good Quidditch player, the broom was working at its absolute limit, doing exactly what it was capable of, and he was working with it rather than through it, using the combination of the broom's enchantment and his own intent in a way that produced something that several students watching from the ground later described as wrong, in the specific way that very fast things are wrong, like reality hadn't caught up yet. He caught the remembrall 6 feet from the castle wall, pulled the broom into a turn that was, physically, tighter than a first-year school broom had any right to manage, and came back down in a long smooth arc that ended precisely where he had started. He landed, stepped off the broom, and handed the remembrall to Ron. "Hold that for Neville," he said. The class was very quiet. Malfoy, still airborne, was looking at him with an expression Harry had not seen on his face before, something past surprise, something that was genuinely uncertain of itself. Madam Hooch had said not to fly. Harry had flown. And what had happened in between was not something that fit the category of first-year student on a school broom. Hermione was staring at him. "You just," she said. "Neville's property," Harry said. "You could have, that was not a normal, Hermione," Harry said gently. "Later." She closed her mouth. Madam Hooch's footsteps were already coming back. She returned, looked at the class, looked at Harry, and here was the interesting thing, the thing that Harry noted and appreciated. She looked at the broom in his hand, looked at his face, and made a decision without asking a question. "Everyone on the ground," she said. "Yes, Professor," various students said. Her eyes met Harry's briefly. He met them directly. She gave him a very small, very controlled look that was clearly a postponed conversation, and moved on. Malfoy landed, put his broom back, and walked past Harry without speaking. But as he passed, he looked at him, not the performed contempt he usually deployed, not the calculated assessment of the library. Something else. Something that was working hard to process new information against a fixed framework and finding the framework coming up short. Harry let him go. After the lesson, walking back across the grounds toward the castle, Ron fell into step beside him and for a full 30 seconds said nothing. Then, how, he said. I'm a natural, Harry said. That is not what a natural looks like, Ron said. I've seen Charlie fly. Charlie's the best flyer in our family, maybe the best in Britain, and he doesn't. You turned the broom like it had a different, he stopped. You're different. Yes, Harry said. You've said that before. You're different. But you don't say what that means. Harry looked at him. Ron was watching him with the open, readable face that was one of his most genuine qualities, no performance, no social calculation, just the direct question of someone who wanted to know. I will, Harry said. When we know each other better. Soon. Ron looked at him for another moment, then nodded, slowly, with the particular dignity of someone accepting a delayed answer because they've decided the person offering it is worth the wait. Okay, he said. Ron, Harry said. Yeah. You jumped in immediately, before the throw, Harry said. Before I was moving. You told him to put it down. Well, obviously, Ron said, as though this were the least remarkable thing about the last 20 minutes. Yeah, Harry said. Obviously. They walked back into the castle together. That night, Harry sat on the edge of his bed in the dormitory with his notes for the week spread around him and wrote a longer letter than usual. He told Apollo about potions and about the conversation with Malfoy in the library, and about the flying lesson with the care and the accuracy that he brought to all the things he put in letters home. Then he wrote a separate section in a different hand, not code, but specific and dense, about what he had observed of Quirrell over the week. The professor's behavior was a study in layered concealment. On the surface, Quirrell performed anxiety and incompetence with the specific consistency of someone who had decided on their cover and were maintaining it. But the anxiety was calibrated wrong. It was always the same quality, the same pitch, regardless of what was actually happening, which meant it was a performed state rather than a genuine one. Genuine anxiety responds to context. Performed anxiety is always volume consistent because it's not actually measuring anything. The entity using Quirrell was watching Harry. He had felt it in 3 separate moments during the defense lesson, a cold, purposeful attention aimed at him with the absolute certainty of something that recognized him. He had met it each time with the same externally unremarkable stillness that he met everything with, and each time the scar had pulsed once and gone quiet. The thing sharing Quirrell's body was exercising restraint. Not because it couldn't act, Harry was not under any illusion that the intelligence behind Voldemort was limited, but because it was gathering data. It was doing what Harry was doing. Learning the terrain. He respected the intelligence even while noting its target. He sealed the letter, put it with Helios's things, and turned to the last piece of parchment in his pile. He had been carrying a specific question for several days, turning it over in the spare moments between classes and meals and observations, and tonight he was going to write it down properly. The Philosopher's Stone, he wrote at the top. Current status, 3rd floor corridor, behind protective challenges. Flamel has been contacted by Zeus regarding potential relocation. Status, pending. He stopped. Tapped his quill against the parchment. The stone was the problem. Or rather, the stone was the mechanism through which the problem would escalate, and the timeline of that escalation was unclear. Voldemort was patient, but his current state was not stable. The attachment to Quirrell was deteriorating the host, which meant there was a deadline, biological in nature, that would push him toward action before he was fully ready. This was, strategically, an advantage. A patient enemy forced into a timeline was a different kind of problem than a patient enemy operating on their own schedule. He needed to know the timeline. He wrote, observe Quirrell for physical deterioration rate. If attachment is accelerating, stone attempt within months rather than year end. Then he put the parchment down and looked at the dormitory ceiling. Ron was asleep, breathing the deep even breath of someone with an excellent relationship with unconsciousness. Dean and Seamus were talking quietly on the other side of the room about something Quidditch-related. Neville had come back from the hospital wing with his wrist healed and had said very little for the rest of the evening, but he had said goodnight to Harry with something in his voice that was slightly different from how he usually said it. Not gratitude. Something more like, the beginning of a decision about himself that he hadn't made yet. Harry thought about what Apollo had said on the balcony when he was 8. Prophecy is not instructions. It's a description of what's most likely to be. He thought about Voldemort in a turban in a castle full of children, waiting. He thought about Dumbledore in his circular office with his twinkling eyes and his plans and his genuine care wrapped around his strategic calculations like two wires wound together. He thought about Neville's face when Harry told him his potion was right. He thought about Ron, who had said obviously like it wasn't even a question. He thought about Hermione, who had been watching him since the first day like she was solving a problem she hadn't fully defined yet, and who, he was increasingly certain, was going to be one of the most important people in his life regardless of what happened next. He picked up his quill and added one more line to the Quirrell notes. Don't let him get to the stone. But don't end it before it's ready either. The timing matters. Then he closed his notes, put them in the warded pocket of his trunk that no standard unlocking charm would open, lay down, and looked at the ceiling in the dark. Outside, the Scottish sky was doing its enormous thing. Somewhere in that dark, Helios was flying south and west, carrying a letter toward the place that was home, and the gods who were there were, in their different ways, paying attention. Harry closed his eyes. He thought, this is going to be a complicated year. He thought, good. The broomstick was in his hand the next morning, though it had arrived in a different way than he expected. McGonagall appeared at breakfast. She touched his shoulder with 2 fingers, the specific, neutral professionalism of someone who was not making this personal in a public space, and said, quietly, Mr. Potter. When you've finished, come with me. He followed her out of the great hall and down the corridor and into a room that turned out not to be a classroom but a small anteroom off the entrance hall, where a man was already waiting. He was tall, angular, with the intense look of someone whose specific obsession was so completely his normal state that he'd stopped noticing it. Oliver Wood, McGonagall said. Captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. He's a seeker, Oliver. Oliver Wood looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has been given a present he wasn't expecting and is determining whether it's real. You're the first year who flew yesterday, he said. Yes, Harry said. Madam Hooch told me it wasn't, she said it was unlike anything she'd seen at first-year level. He paused. She also said you were on a school broom. Yes. Oliver's expression went through several things. We have rules, he said, with visible internal conflict. First years don't play on the house team. It's been the rule for, Oliver, McGonagall said. It's been the rule for 100 years, Professor, Oliver said, not backing down, because Oliver Wood apparently also had the quality of absolute conviction about things he cared about. I'm not saying he's not, I'm saying the rule, I'm aware of the rule, McGonagall said. I'm also aware that discretion exists for good reason. I'm not asking you to do anything improper. I'm asking you to see the boy fly properly before you make a judgment. Oliver looked at Harry. All right, he said. Come to the pitch after dinner. Proper broom. And I'll see for myself. Harry went to the pitch after dinner, on a Nimbus 2000 that would produced with the reverence of a man handing someone a very fine instrument. He flew. Wood watched. After approximately 5 minutes, Wood landed his broom and sat on the ground and looked at the sky for a moment. Then he said, You're our seeker. The rule, Harry said. McGonagall will sort it, Wood said, with the complete confidence of someone who had identified the obstacle and had immediately put it in someone else's category. He stood up. He looked at Harry with the full intensity of a person for whom Quidditch was not a game but a calling. Can you start training Tuesday? Yes, Harry said. Have you ever played? Not formally, Harry said, which was not untrue. He had, at 10 years old on Olympus, chased things through the air that were considerably faster and more evasive than a snitch. But formality was a separate category. But you can fly, Wood said. Yes, Harry said. And you can track, the way you tracked the Remembrall, that was, he made a gesture with his hands that apparently conveyed his assessment of the tracking. Right. Tuesday. 6 a.m. 6 a.m., Harry said. I know, Wood said, without regret. But we've got a championship to win. Harry looked at him, this absolute person, entirely himself, operating at complete commitment to the thing he loved, and felt a specific kind of warmth for him that was immediate and genuine. Okay, he said. 6 a.m. He flew back to the castle in the September dark, the nimbus under his hands and the stars overhead, the enormous Scottish sky doing its thing, the castle lit in the valley below him like something out of a story that was also real. It was exactly what it was. He let himself have it. He told Ron and Hermione at breakfast the next morning. Ron's response was a string of sentences delivered at speed, most of which were variations on "That's brilliant" and "Charlie's going to lose his mind." Hermione's response was to look thoughtful for a moment and then say, "You're going to need to balance the time commitment with the academic schedule. Quidditch practice can't compromise your study hours." "I know," Harry said. "I'm just saying," she said. "I know," Harry said again, with the warm patience he had developed specifically for the version of Hermione that expressed care through logistics. "I've already mapped the schedule. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, weekend afternoon session. It doesn't conflict." She nodded, satisfied. "Good." She went back to her breakfast. Then, after a moment, without looking up, "You were extraordinary on that broom yesterday." "Obviously." Harry looked at her. She was reading her toast rather than his face, which was her version of making something casual that she'd decided mattered. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said. Still not looking up. "Eat your breakfast." Ron was grinning into his pumpkin juice. Outside the high windows of the Great Hall, the morning was doing what Scottish September mornings did, committing to grey with total conviction, the kind of weather that was not unpleasant but was completely honest about what it was. Harry ate his breakfast and felt the specific texture of the morning, the warmth of the table, the noise of the hall, the weight of what he knew running alongside the ordinary rhythm of the day. Somewhere on the third floor, behind a locked door and a row of challenges, something very old and very powerful sat in its protected space. Somewhere in the castle, in a turban, something waited. Harry put marmalade on his toast and planned his Tuesday. Chapter 5, What the Dark Lord Learned. November came to Hogwarts like a verdict. The warmth drained out of the grounds by degrees through October until one morning everyone woke up and the lake was a sheet of pewter and the trees at the edge of the Forbidden Forest had gone skeletal, and the castle stopped being a backdrop to the outdoor world and became the world itself, stone corridors and fire-lit common rooms and the specific interior season of a place that was built to be lived in through winter. Harry ran the grounds at 6 every morning regardless. Not because he needed the conditioning. His baseline from 9 years of Olympian training was sufficient that Hogwarts curriculum, even including Quidditch practice, didn't substantially challenge his physical limits. He ran because he needed the time outside, the open sky, the specific quality of early morning air that was different from any interior version of itself. He needed the space to think without walls. He ran in the dark before dawn with the grounds entirely to himself and Hogwarts standing behind him doing its old attentive thing, and he thought about the problem. Quirrell was deteriorating faster than Harry had initially estimated. He had adjusted his timeline twice in the last 3 weeks. The first adjustment was in October, when he noticed that the quality of Quirrell's physical presence during defense lessons had changed, not dramatically, not in a way the other students were tracking, but Harry had a calibrated eye for the specific kind of damage that proximity to powerful dark magic did to a human body, and the signs were unmistakable once you knew what to look for. The slight translucence around the edges of the man. The way his hands shook in private moments when he wasn't performing the stammer. The way his shadow fell wrong sometimes, at particular angles, as though it was answering to something other than the light source. The second adjustment was 2 weeks ago, after a defense lesson where Quirrell had turned, for a half second, and looked at Harry not with the anxious performance of the host but with the cold, total recognition of the thing inside him, before snapping back. Brief. Fully controlled. But an indicator that the separation between Quirrell's will and Voldemort's was thinning. Which meant the timeline was weeks, not months. He had written to Zeus about it. Zeus had written back with 4 lines, Flamel has agreed. The stone can be moved by December. Have a specific plan before then. Trust yourself. Harry had the specific plan. He'd had it for about 10 days, and had been turning it over, stress testing it, looking for the places where it could be wrong. The plan had 3 parts: gather intelligence, control the environment, and engage on his own terms rather than Voldemort's. The third part was the one that required patience. He was working on the patience. He came back in from the grounds as the sky was going from black to the specific dark blue that meant dawn was 20 minutes out, and he ran into Hermione coming down the stairs to the common room, fully dressed, with a book under her arm and the expression of someone who had been awake for some time and was not going to pretend otherwise. "You're always back by 6:15, she said. "Yes," he said. "I've been timing it," she said, in the tone of someone stating a research methodology. "I know," he said. She sat in the armchair nearest the fire and opened her book. Harry sat on the hearthrug and stretched, and for a few minutes the common room was just the two of them and the fire and the sound of the castle doing its early morning settling. "Harry," she said, without looking up. "Yes." "Quirrell," she said. "Tell me what you know." He looked at her. She was still reading, or performing reading, with the characteristic expression that meant she had been building to this question for a while and had decided this morning was when she was asking it. He had told her considerably more over the past weeks than he had told most people, or rather, he had allowed her to arrive at considerably more, because Hermione's intelligence was self-propelling and the kindest thing he could do with it was get out of its way and confirm the thing she had already figured out. She knew about the stone in general terms. She had worked out Quirrell on her own from the defense lessons and had said so, 2 weeks ago, very quietly, in the library, with the expression of someone who did not enjoy being right about unpleasant things. What she hadn't asked directly yet was the question she was asking now. "He's hosting Voldemort," Harry said. "Has been since Albania, 2 years ago. The attachment is deteriorating him. He'll try for the stone before Christmas." Hermione was completely still for a moment. Then she turned a page. "What are you going to do about it?" "Deal with it," Harry said. "On your own." "With you, if you want," Harry said. "And Ron." She was quiet for a moment. "You should tell Dumbledore," she said, but she said it in the specific tone that meant she had already thought about why that was and wasn't purely true and was saying it as a position to argue from rather than a position she fully occupied. "Dumbledore knows Voldemort is in the castle," Harry said. "He allowed the stone to be here as bait, essentially. His solution to the problem involves a child solving a series of puzzles and emerging alive through sufficient luck and residual protective magic." He met her eyes when she looked up. "That's not a plan. That's a contingency." "And yours?" "Mine involves actually ending it," Harry said. "Not surviving it. Ending it." Hermione looked at him for a long moment with those clear, fierce eyes that were always doing more than they appeared to be doing. "The power the Dark Lord knows not," she said, quietly. "That's in the prophecy. I found the prophecy. Or rather, I found records of a prophecy, and the general terms of it, in the restricted section." "You broke into the restricted section?" Harry said. "I had a note from Professor Flitwick for another book entirely and I may have extended its scope somewhat," she said, without apology. "The point is, the power he knows not. That's not referring to your mother's sacrifice, is it? That's," she stopped. "What you have. What you actually are." Harry watched her. "Your family isn't human," she said. "I've been working on this since September. You move wrong, you move right, which is wrong, because no 10-year-old who has never had formal training moves the way you move. You flew in a way that wasn't physically possible on that broom. Your wand work in classes is." Flitwick told Sprout that you were unlike anything he'd seen and Sprout told McGonagall and McGonagall said she agreed, and I heard that conversation because I was in the greenhouse and they didn't know I was there. She set the book down. And there's something about you that's warm. Literally. Like a heat source. I sit next to you every day and you're 3 degrees warmer than everyone else in any room. Harry was quiet. So, she said. What are you? The fire crackled. The common room was still empty except for them. Outside the windows the sky was moving from blue towards something lighter, the slow mechanical permission of the dawn. He had been thinking about this moment for a while. Not anxiously, he did not have anxiety about being known, which was one of the many gifts of having been raised by people who knew what he was and loved him for it. He had been thinking about the how of it. How to give it to her in a way that would satisfy the particular quality of her intelligence, which did not want metaphor or vagueness, which wanted structure and evidence and something she could work with. My father is Zeus, he said. King of the Olympian gods. My uncle is Apollo. I was raised on Olympus from the time I was 1 year old. He paused. I'm a wizard by birth. I'm something else by upbringing. The two things are both real and both mine. Hermione sat very still. The power Voldemort doesn't know about, Harry continued, is not a specific power in the sense of a weapon. It's a scale. He has been preparing for a wizard. Someone operating in the framework of wizarding magic, using wizarding tools, bounded by wizarding limits. He looked at her steadily. I don't operate within those limits. Not entirely. Hermione's expression was doing something extraordinary, cycling through shock, recalibration, academic excitement, concern, more academic excitement, and something that was settling toward the fierce concentrated attention she brought to things she'd decided mattered. Zeus, she said. As in, the actual Zeus. The one from everywhere, Harry said. Yes. And Apollo. Yes. Your uncle is Apollo. She said it the way she said things that she was testing the reality of. The god of the sun. And prophecy. And healing. And she stopped. Looked at him. The scar, she said. The prophecy. Apollo is the god of prophecy. He would have read the threads of it before you were even a year old, wouldn't he? He would have, he was on the doorstep the night Dumbledore left me, Harry said. He stayed until dawn. Something moved across Hermione's face that was less academic and more human, the specific emotion of someone who has just been shown the inside of a story they thought they knew. They chose you, she said. They found me, Harry said. Whether that's choosing depends on how you think about it. She was quiet for a moment. It's the same thing, she said, softly. Harry looked at her. He had not expected her to land on that. He should have, it was exactly the kind of thing she would land on. He felt the warmth of it land in him, the specific warmth of being known accurately by someone who had earned the knowing. Yes, he said. I think it probably is. He told Ron that afternoon. Ron's response was structurally different from Hermione's, not less intelligent, but differently organized. Where Hermione had built from evidence to conclusion with the methodical satisfaction of a proof, Ron received the information and sat with it for a moment with the expression of someone turning a large object over in their hands to find out how it worked. Then he said, so the flying makes complete sense now. Harry laughed. The sharp, surprised sound. No, seriously, Ron said, with the focused interest of someone who cared about the right things. That broom was doing things it shouldn't have done. I've been thinking about it for weeks. Charlie would have, he stopped. Is that why the hat took so long? It couldn't sort, I mean, what category does a son of Zeus go in? It said I was larger than the categories, Harry said. But it put you in Gryffindor anyway. I told it to put me where I'd do the most good, Harry said. Ron looked at him for a long moment. And it agreed, he said. Which means, he worked through this. Which means you were already running a strategy. In the sorting. On your first day. Yes, Harry said. Ron let out a long breath. Right, he said. Then, the stone. Quirrell. What you said you were planning to do about it. He met Harry's eyes with the direct, unguarded look that was one of his best qualities. You said with more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 6, The Prince's Verdict. December arrived the way it had been promising to for weeks, absolute and cold and committed, the kind of winter that settled into Hogwarts stones and stayed. The torches in the corridors burned harder against it. The lake froze at its edges in overnight increments. The forbidden forest turned from skeletal to something more complete, a winter architecture that was its own kind of statement about what wildness looked like when it stopped performing. Harry noticed all of it. He noticed everything. Now, the castle had become readable to him over the months in the way that all spaces became readable when you lived in them with attention. He knew its moods, its specific responses to weather and season and population density. He knew which corridors felt different at night and which staircases had their own opinions and which rooms remembered their previous inhabitants in ways that were less metaphorical than people assumed. He was ready. The letter from Zeus had come 4 days ago. Stone moved. Flamel is satisfied with the new arrangements. The bait is gone, but the trap remains. What's in that corridor now is your decision. Harry had read it 3 times and written back, understood. Proceeding. He had gathered everything he needed to know. Quirrell's deterioration had crossed the threshold Harry had identified 3 weeks ago. The man was visibly wrong now, enough that other students had noticed and were keeping a wider berth in the corridors, attributing it to some vague illness. The cold dark intelligence behind his eyes was less controlled, less patient, showing at the edges of his performance more frequently. Harry had felt it, twice in the past week, reaching toward him during defense lessons, not an attack, but a probe, the specific quality of a very powerful consciousness testing the walls of something it was considering breaking. He had let it feel the walls and draw its own conclusions. He sat in the common room on the Friday evening 3 weeks before Christmas term ended, with the fire going strong and Ron at the table behind him losing a game of chess to himself while Hermione revised for their end-of-term charms assessment, and he told them it was time. Hermione looked up from her notes. Ron stopped moving a chess piece. Tonight? Ron said. He'll move before the term ends, Harry said. He's been circling the 3rd floor for 2 days. Whatever held him back, caution, preparation, Dumbledore's proximity, it's less important to him now than the timeline. He looked at them both. He doesn't know the stone is gone. He thinks it's still behind the challenges. He's going to go for it tonight or tomorrow. So we go first, Hermione said. I go first, Harry said. You two have a different job. Ron frowned. What job? Peeves has been in the trophy room all evening, Harry said. He'll be there for another 2 hours. If someone were to tell him that Filch was in the corridor outside saying things about his collection, Ron's frown transformed into a grin of immediate comprehensive understanding. And Hermione, Harry continued. The alarm on the 3rd floor corridor, the one Dumbledore set, keyed to unauthorized entry. It reports to his office instruments. You want me to modify it, Hermione said. She said it with the expression of someone who had decided 3 weeks ago that certain rules existed for certain circumstances and that the circumstances had sufficiently changed. I want it to show a normal reading for the next 2 hours, Harry said. Can you do that? Hermione's expression was the one she used when she was about to do something impressive and intended to make it look straightforward. Yes, she said. I need 30 minutes after you do it, Harry said. Then you can restore it. What happens in 30 minutes? Ron asked. Harry looked at the fire. I end it, he said. The fire crackled. Ron looked at him for a moment with the specific expression he used when he was deciding something. You're sure you don't want us there? I'm sure, Harry said. It was not a dismissal of them, they both heard that, the clear and warm distinction. He was not sending them away because they were less than he was. He was sending them to where they were needed and keeping himself to where he was needed, and the difference was real. This part is mine. Your part is equally necessary. Ron nodded once. The chess piece he'd been holding went back on its square. Right then, he said. I'll go find Peeves. Give it 20 minutes, Harry said. I need to do something first. He went to the Ollery. The cold hit him on the stairs, the specific sharp cold of a space that was genuinely exterior, open to the sky, inhabited by creatures that did not require warmth. Helios was on her perch near the top, tucked against the stone, and she turned her tawny head and looked at him with the golden eyes that had been watching him since he was old enough to choose her himself. He didn't have a letter tonight. He stood on the Ollery stairs and looked out at the black sky over the castle grounds, and he thought about what he was about to do with the clarity that came when you had been preparing for something long enough that the preparation was finished and what remained was only the action. He thought about his father. Not the tactical preparation, not the intelligence reports, not the 4 lines from the last letter. He thought about the morning he had left Olympus, standing in the entrance hall with his trunk and his owl and the photograph in his pocket, and Zeus putting his hand on his shoulder with that weight-carrying gesture that was not protective in the way of someone worried you couldn't manage. It was the gesture of someone marking the moment. Saying, I was here. This was real. Go. He thought about Apollo making breakfast and not saying what he was feeling because he knew Harry would know it without the words, the way people who have known each other long enough communicate more in the shared quiet than in the speaking. He put his hand on Helios's head for a moment. She leaned into it. Watch for a letter tomorrow, he told her. He went back down the stairs. The 3rd-floor corridor at 11 at night was the specific quiet of a place that was designed to discourage investigation. The do not enter notice on the locked door had been there since September and had, in the way of clearly marked prohibitions in schools, drawn exactly as much investigation as it was meant to deter. Harry had been in the corridor twice before, brief, observational, enough to map the space and feel what was behind the door. He unlocked it with a word and walked in. The corridor behind it led to the next obstacle, a trapdoor in the floor with a large and extremely relaxed 3-headed dog lying across it. The dog had been named Fluffy by whoever had placed it here, which Harry had always found both charming and slightly undignified given the dog's actual scale and capability. 3 heads, each the size of a small cart, and the specific quality of a magical creature that had been given a job it took seriously. All 3 heads looked at him. Harry looked at all 3 heads. He had a small, carved instrument in his pocket, not a flute, something smaller, something he had made himself from a piece of olive wood that Apollo had given him years ago, the kind of small personal making that his uncle had always encouraged. He took it out and played 4 notes. The dog went to sleep between the 2nd and 3rd note. He opened the trapdoor and dropped down. The devil's snare was first, dark and reaching, the tendril grip of a plant that responded to struggle by tightening and to stillness by loosening. Harry walked through it with the patient, unhurried step of someone who had grown up in spaces where wild things lived and knew that they were usually less interested in you than their defensive responses suggested. The tendrils reached, found nothing to work with, retreated. The winged keys were a room full of brightness and motion, thousands of locked wings creating a sustained ambient sound that was almost musical. The right key was somewhere in the chaos. Harry stood in the center of the room, went very still, and felt for the specific enchantment, the one keyed to the door lock, the one vibrating at the particular frequency of its match. He found it in 4 seconds, closed his hand around it as it flew past, and opened the door. The chess room was different. He paused on the threshold and looked at it with proper attention, because McGonagall had built this and McGonagall's work deserved proper attention. Giant chess pieces in white and black marble, animated with a strategic intelligence that he could feel from the doorway, not simple pattern following, but actual positional thinking, the kind that required understanding of threat and response simultaneously. The black pieces controlled the board from their current position. The only way through was to play. He sat in the white queen square. The game that followed took 11 minutes. He did not sacrifice pieces because he did not need to, he saw the full board immediately, ran the game to its conclusion in 3 moves, and executed it in 9 additional moves because a 3-move game would have required spectacular positioning that wasn't available from the opening. The Black King fell and the pieces cleared to either side with the satisfying solidity of magical objects completing their purpose. He walked through. The troll was unconscious. Something had already dealt with it, a dark, purposeful magic that had hit it from behind and left marks that Harry recognized. Voldemort had come this way. Recently. He was ahead. Harry moved faster. The potions room was a logic puzzle, 7 bottles, fire behind and forward, a riddle in verse on a parchment that explained the rules. Harry read the riddle once, identified the correct bottle in 45 seconds through the potion's visual properties and the logic structure of the riddle itself, drank the smallest bottle, and went through the black fire barrier. He stepped into the last room. It was not what he had expected, and what he had expected was already not simple. The room was large, circular, and entirely bare except for the mirror of Eriste standing against the far wall. The mirror was enormous, taller than 2 men, framed in gold that had the specific quality of something old enough to have forgotten what it was made for and become something else. The inscription ran across the top in the backward script that resolved to, "I show not your face but your heart's desire." Quirrell stood in front of it. He was not performing the stammer. He was not performing the anxious professor. He was standing in front of the mirror with his hands clasped behind his back and the turban on his head, and the quality of his stillness was entirely wrong for Quirinus Quirrell. It was the stillness of something very old and very patient that had arrived at a destination and was working out the last step. He turned when Harry entered. The face he turned was not Quirrell's face anymore. Or rather, it was Quirrell's face with everything that had made it Quirrell's thoroughly displaced. The pale eyes that looked at Harry were cold in a specific way, the cold of something that had decided warmth was a weakness and had been removing it from itself for decades. "Harry Potter," he said. Quirrell's voice, but not Quirrell's cadence. Something slower, more deliberate, carrying a weight that the body it was using was not built for. "Good evening," Harry said. He looked at the mirror, at Quirrell, at the room. Mapped it. The exit was behind him. The mirror was between him and whatever Voldemort needed. Quirrell's posture was frustrated. He had been standing here for long enough to know that the mirror was not giving him what he needed. The stone was gone, but Voldemort didn't know that yet. He was still trying to use the mirror's original enchantment. "You should not be here," Quirrell said. "You're right," Harry said, walking into the room without haste. "You should have been stopped before you got this far." He looked at the mirror. "The stone isn't in there." A pause. The cold eyes moved over him. "What did you say?" "The Philosopher's Stone," Harry said, stopping about 8 feet away and looking at the mirror with the same investigative attention he gave everything. "It's not here. It was moved." He paused. "About 4 days ago." The quality of the silence that followed was remarkable. He felt it, the specific reorganization of a very powerful intelligence receiving information that invalidated its current plan and rebuilding immediately. Not panic. Not anger, quite. Something more like the sound a massive machine makes when you remove the gear it was running on and it tries to figure out what to use instead. "Who are you?" Voldemort said. Not Quirrell's voice at all now, something coming through it, older, stripped of the host's coloration. "What are you?" "I'm Harry Potter," Harry said. "You are not what I was told." "No," Harry said. "I'm not." He felt the probe come, the direct mental reach that was one of Voldemort's primary tools, the legilimency that he used like a hand reaching into a room to take what it wanted. It hit Harry's mind and the sensation was like throwing a stone at a wall that was also, unexpectedly, a furnace. The probe recoiled. Quirrell made a short, sharp sound. He stepped back from the impact. "That's not," the voice collected itself. "You have no training in occlumency." "That was not occlumency." "No," Harry said. "It wasn't." He took another step forward, not aggressive, just closing the distance to a range he wanted. He looked at Quirrell, at the man underneath the occupation, the professor who had gone to Albania and made a terrible decision that was still, somewhere very deep, regretting itself, and then he looked at what was sharing that space, and he let himself see it fully, without the careful modulation he had been applying in defense lessons for 3 months. Voldemort felt the look. "What are you?" he said again, and this time it was not rhetorical. It was the specific question of an intelligence that had encountered something outside its model and needed to place it. "Do you want the honest answer?" Harry said. "Tell me," Voldemort said, and the voice was different now, quieter, stripped of performance, the voice of someone with nothing left to perform for. "Just the actual question. You have no fear." "I can feel the absence of it. Every human I have ever encountered carries fear of me like a physical thing. You have none." "I grew up around things considerably more powerful than you," Harry said. "Not cruelly. Plainly. I'm not measuring you against nothing. I'm measuring you against what I know, and in that measurement you are a man who made a terrible decision a long time ago and has been paying for it ever since." The temperature in the room dropped. Not metaphorically, actually dropped, a physical drop, the specific cold that powerful dark magic generates when it is not bothering to be subtle. The shadows in the room deepened and moved, and the mirror behind Quirrell reflected something that was not the room's current occupants. "I will not be lectured," Voldemort said. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not lecturing you. I'm telling you what I see." He looked at Quirrell's body, at the specific biological deterioration that proximity to Voldemort had caused. "He's almost gone, by the way. Quirrell. Weeks at most. You've been using him up." "He was a means," Voldemort said. "He was a person," Harry said, and said it the same way, not as a rebuke, not as an appeal, just as the accurate thing. People are generally more useful when treated as such. That's not a moral argument. It's a practical one. A pause. "You are 10 years old," Voldemort said, and there was something in it, not the dismissive version that other people used, but something that sounded, almost, like he was recalibrating around genuine uncertainty. "Yes," Harry said. "And you believe you can stop me?" "I'm not trying to stop you," Harry said. "Stopping implies a contest. This isn't a contest." He held Voldemort's gaze through Quirrell's eyes, those cold, colonized eyes, and said clearly and simply, "The stone is gone. Your host is failing. The path you've been building toward for the last decade has changed shape." He paused. "I can end this tonight, cleanly, or you can continue in this state until Quirrell's body gives out and you lose whatever coherence you've managed to maintain. Those are the actual options." "And if I end you first?" Voldemort said. Harry looked at him. "I've been trained by the God of the Sun and the King of the Gods for 9 years, he said. "I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm asking you to consider the last 3 minutes, in which you've tried 3 different approaches and none of them have touched me, and apply that observation." Silence. The mirror glimmered behind Quirrell. The shadows moved. Harry stood in the center of the room and felt the whole structure of the situation, the way Zeus had taught him to feel a battlefield, not as a series of individual threats but as a whole, a system, with the specific weight and momentum of something that has been building toward a resolution for a long time. Voldemort moved. Not through Quirrell, around him. The spirit detached and came forward as itself, and for the first time Harry saw Voldemort as he actually was, not the terrifying physical form from his parents' memories, not the fragments of something that barely cohered. What came forward was a consciousness, cold, enormous, ancient in the way of things that have been fighting their own nature for a very long time, sharp with the specific intelligence of someone who had studied power all their life and understood it better than almost anyone. It was genuinely impressive. Harry recognized this without being moved by it, the way you can recognize that a storm is beautiful without it changing your plans. The attack when it came was not the killing curse. It was smarter than that. It was a targeted strike at Harry's magical core, an attempt to sever the connection between his inherited divine power and his wizarding magic, the seam between two systems that Voldemort had identified in his 3 minutes of observation. It was a devastatingly good read of the actual vulnerability. It would have worked on almost anything human. Harry let the lightning answer it. Not from his wand. He had the wand in his hand, but it was doing what Apollo had taught him it should do, 10% of the work, present for form, not for function. What actually responded was the power that was his in the deepest possible sense, the thing that had been building since he was 5 years old in a training ground on Olympus and first called lightning and brought down 3 olive trees. The strike hit Voldemort's consciousness like a sun hitting fog. The sound it made was not an explosion, it was stranger than that. A resonance, the specific harmonic of two things that were fundamentally incompatible meeting at full force. The room went white bright for 1 second, the full clean white of Olympian light, and in that second Harry felt Voldemort's consciousness recoil with something he had not expected to feel from it. Pain. Not the pain of something being damaged. The pain of something encountering a truth it had been successfully avoiding for a very long time and failing, briefly, to avoid it. Then Voldemort was gone. Not destroyed, Harry had known this would not destroy him, had planned for this, had no illusion that a spirit without a body could be killed in the ordinary sense. What had happened was a dispersal, a scattering. The coherence that Voldemort had maintained through sheer force of will was disrupted at a level that would take months to rebuild. He was pushed back into the formless state that was the closest thing to rest a disembodied consciousness had. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him before he hit the floor, which was a pure reflex, the same reflex that had caught the Remembrall in September. He lowered him to the ground and looked at the man. Quirrell was conscious, barely, his eyes open, the cold displacement behind them gone, and what was left was a person who had been used for 2 years and was running on fumes. Quirrell, Harry said. The man's eyes found him. Something moved in them. Recognition, and underneath that something that was not quite regret but was in the same county. It's gone, Quirrell said, in his own voice for the first time. Thin, ragged, the voice of someone who had been a passenger in themselves for a long time. I can feel, it's gone. Yes, Harry said. The stone, not here, Harry said. Safe. Quirrell closed his eyes. His breathing was shallow and irregular, the body's report on the damage the occupation had done. I knew, he said, very quietly. When I went to Albania. I knew it was, I told myself I could control it. That I would be stronger. That the power, he stopped. A long exhale. There's never a version where that works. Is there? No, Harry said, honestly. There isn't. Potter, Quirrell said, without opening his eyes. I was, before. I was a good teacher. I think. He stopped again. Harry looked at him. At this man who had made a terrible decision from a recognizable place, the same place that most terrible decisions came from, the desire to be more than you were through a shortcut that bypassed the cost of the work. He felt something for him that was not forgiveness in the formal sense, because Harry had not been the one wronged, but was something in the direction of it. Someone will come, Harry said. You'll be found and treated. He paused. The part of you that was a good teacher is still there. He put his hand briefly on Quirrell's shoulder, the same light, weight-carrying gesture that Zeus had given him on the morning he left, and stood up. He was at the door when Quirrell said, very quietly, what are you? Harry paused with his hand on the doorframe. Something new, he said. He walked out. Dumbledore found Quirrell 40 minutes later. Harry knew this because he felt the specific quality of Dumbledore's magic moving through the castle. The old man had been alerted, not by the alarms, which Hermione had restored to normal readings 90 seconds after Harry had gone through the trapdoor, but by whatever personal sensitivity he maintained for significant magical events. He had felt the resonance when Harry's power had met Voldemort's, Harry was fairly certain. The whole castle had probably felt it, the way you feel thunder before you hear it. He was in the hospital wing by the time Dumbledore's footsteps were in the corridor. Not because he was injured. He had not a mark on him, and the hospital wing matron, Madame Pomfrey, who was exactly as efficiently kind as her reputation suggested, had confirmed this with the specific satisfied disapproval of someone whose ideal outcome was having nothing to treat. He was there because it seemed like the right place to be when Dumbledore arrived, already accounted for, already located, not waiting in a dramatic posture for the conversation. Dumbledore came in, closed the door, and looked at him for a long moment. "Quirrell," Harry said. "He's alive," Dumbledore said. "In poor condition, but alive." He moved to the chair beside Harry's bed and sat in it with the slight heaviness of someone who was tired in a specific way, not physically but in the way of people who have been running a version of events in their head and have arrived at the place where the actual version diverges significantly. "The stone." "Gone," Harry said. "Safe." Nicholas Flamel agreed it should be moved. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You contacted Nicholas Flamel?" "Someone on my behalf did," Harry said. "About 3 weeks ago." Another silence. The hospital wing around them was dark and quiet, the rest of the beds empty, the fire low. Dumbledore removed his half-moon glasses and cleaned them with the specific unhurried gesture of someone who needed a moment that was available to them. "I owe you," Dumbledore said, a significant apology. Harry looked at him. "I left you on a doorstep," Dumbledore said, and said it with the directness of someone who had decided that honesty was the only currency worth using tonight. "I told myself it was necessary. That the blood protection required your mother's sister. That the discomfort of those years would be outweighed by the outcome I was building toward." He paused. "I built a plan around a child I had designated to be a particular thing, and the plan required that child to be shaped in a particular way. Unaware. Isolated enough to be guided." He looked at his glasses rather than at Harry. "It was not the worst plan I have ever made. But it was not a good one." "No," Harry said. "It wasn't." "You were protected," Dumbledore said. "Better than I could have managed." "I know that now." "And you are." He looked at Harry then, and the look had something in it that was fully unguarded, the emotion of an old man who had loved James and Lily Potter and was looking at their son and finding the meeting of the familiar and the entirely unexpected. "You are extraordinary. In ways I am only beginning to understand." "I know," Harry said. And then, because it was true and because Dumbledore had been honest and deserved honesty back, "You cared. That's real. The plan was wrong but the caring underneath it was real." Dumbledore looked at him. "I'm not going to be a chess piece," Harry said. "That's not a threat. It's just the accurate thing. I'm going to be here, at Hogwarts, learning what this world does with magic, and I'm going to deal with Voldemort when the time comes for the dealing. I'd rather do that with you understanding what I am than without." He met the old man's eyes. "But the understanding runs both ways." "Yes," Dumbledore said, quietly. "It does." They were silent for a moment. The fire crackled. "Your family," Dumbledore said. "Will they?" The window of the hospital wing opened. Not dramatically. It simply opened, the latch moving on its own, and the cold night air came in carrying the specific quality of something vast and attentive and entirely unimpressed by walls. Dumbledore went very still. Apollo came in first, not through the window in any physical sense but as a presence, a warmth that entered the room the way sunlight enters through a gap, filling it without asking. He was in human form, the brilliant golden brown of him warm even in the hospital wing's dim light, and he looked at Harry first and something moved across his face that he did not bother to contain. Zeus came through the door. He had not used the window. He had walked through the front doors of Hogwarts and up the stairs and through the hospital wing door, and the quality of his arrival was entirely different from Apollo's, not warmth but weight, the specific atmospheric pressure of something enormous moving through a space that was not built for it. The candles in the hospital wing went brighter without anyone touching them. Madame Pomfrey made a small sound from her office and did not emerge. Dumbledore stood. He stood because there was nothing else you did when Zeus walked into a room. It was not a choice. It was a response. Zeus looked at him for a moment, a brief, comprehensive assessment that contained, Harry recognized, the entire history of what Dumbledore had done and not done regarding Harry, catalogued and decided upon in the space of 3 seconds. Then he looked at Harry. "You're unhurt," Zeus said. "Completely," Harry said. "The dispersal was clean." "Yes. Months of rebuilding at minimum before he's coherent enough to act again." Zeus nodded. The nod of someone receiving a report that confirms what they expected. Then he moved to the chair on the other side of Harry's bed. Dumbledore's chair was on the left, Zeus took the right, and the geometry of this was not lost on anyone in the room, and sat down with the unhurried authority of someone who had decided where they were and did not intend to explain it. Apollo perched on the end of the bed in a way that was less formal and entirely characteristic. "Walk me through it," he said, to Harry. Harry walked him through it. The chess, the devil's snare, the troll already felled, the mirror room, Voldemort's 3 attempts and the dispersal. He was precise and factual, and Apollo listened with the full quality of his attention, which was considerable, asking 2 questions at the end that were both about the specific mechanics of the dispersal. "The seam attack was intelligent," Apollo said. "He identified the genuine vulnerability." "I know," Harry said. "I should have expected it." "You did expect it," Apollo said. "The response was already prepared." "Not specifically for that attack," Harry said. "Generally. I had a category for it, not the exact form." "That's fine," Apollo said. "That's what preparation actually looks like. You don't rehearse the specific event. You build the capacity to respond to the category." He looked at Harry with the expression that he used when he was satisfied with something and intended to say so fully. "You did well." Harry felt it land, the specific warmth of that, the approval of someone whose approval mattered because it was not freely given and was not performing itself. "Thank you," he said. Zeus had been looking at Dumbledore during this exchange. Dumbledore had been standing, then sat again, and was now looking at Zeus with the expression of someone who had met many extraordinary things in a long life and was encountering the scale of this particular one and finding it clarifying. In the way that very large things are clarifying, not because they simplify everything but because they make the hierarchy of importance very obvious. "Albus Dumbledore," Zeus said. His voice in the hospital wing was not loud but had the quality of something that does not need to be. "My Lord Zeus," Dumbledore said, and said it without irony or performance, in the quiet voice of someone who had just decided that a particular kind of pride was not appropriate to this situation. "My son has given you more consideration than I might have," Zeus said. "He is more generous than I am." He paused. "This is frequently a quality in him that I am learning to respect rather than simply observe." Harry looked at him. Zeus did not look back. He was still addressing Dumbledore, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was entirely private and entirely deliberate. "What happened tonight," Zeus continued, "was the opening of a longer conflict, not its resolution. You know this." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Voldemort will rebuild," Zeus said. "He will find another path to a body, another route to power, and when he returns he will be more informed than he was tonight, because he will have learned what Harry is." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "That changes the shape of the war. He will not make the same assumptions. He will not approach this as a conflict between wizards. What will he approach it as?" Dumbledore asked. "A problem requiring a new kind of solution," Zeus said. "Which means we require a new kind of preparation." He looked briefly at Harry. "Harry's place here is not changed by tonight. His education proceeds. His relationships in this school are real and he will not abandon them for a training ground." He paused. "But you will have the full understanding of what you are housing in this school, and what it means for the conflict coming, and you will not attempt to use my son as a piece in your arrangements again." It was not a request. Dumbledore held Zeus's gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "I understand." "Good," Zeus said. And then, to Harry's private astonishment, Zeus's voice shifted, not to warmth exactly, because Zeus did not do warmth on demand, but to something adjacent. He tells me your phoenix is remarkable, Zeus said, to Dumbledore. A beat. Dumbledore blinked. The gear change was sufficiently abrupt to briefly dismantle his composure. Fawkes, Dumbledore said. Yes. Yes. He's been with me for, Apollo has opinions about phoenix husbandry, Zeus said. I do have opinions about phoenix husbandry, Apollo confirmed, from the end of the bed, with the serene certainty of someone who found this a completely reasonable conversational turn. Dumbledore looked at Apollo. Then at Zeus. Then at Harry, who gave him the small private nod that said, yes, this is how they are. You'll get used to it. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, something old and controlled loosening by one layer, the specific unbuttoning of someone who has been holding a particular version of themselves in place for several hours and has just been given permission to put it down slightly. I would, he said, slowly, be very interested in that conversation. Tomorrow, Apollo said. When Harry's had a night's sleep. I don't need, Harry started. Sleep, Apollo said, without looking at him. I'm not actually, Harry, Zeus said. Harry closed his mouth. Dumbledore made a sound that was, unmistakably, the beginning of a laugh quickly rerouted into a cough. He stood, and looked at Harry, and the look he gave him was one of the few looks Harry had received from him that was entirely without strategic layering. Good night, Harry, he said. Good night, Professor, Harry said. Dumbledore left, pulling the door closed behind him, and the hospital wing went quiet with the three of them in it. Apollo moved from the end of the bed to the chair Dumbledore had vacated and looked at Harry with the full warmth of someone who had been approximately one letter away from coming to Scotland 3 days ago and had held themselves back by deliberate discipline. You didn't write when it started moving, he said. It moved faster than I expected, Harry said. There was no useful window. I know, Apollo said. I know there wasn't. I'm telling you that the next time there is a window, use it. Yes, Harry said. Even a short one, Apollo said. Even if the information is incomplete. Yes, Harry said again, with the specific patient acceptance of someone receiving a note they had already made themselves. Apollo looked at him for a moment. Then he reached over and put his hand on Harry's head briefly, the gesture of warmth that was entirely unself-conscious, that he had done since Harry was small enough that it had covered most of the top of his head. It still landed the same way. Zeus said nothing for a while. He sat in the chair on the right side of the bed and looked at the room and then at Harry with an expression that was several things in layers, and Harry let him have the silence because Zeus's silences were almost always doing something. Voldemort identified the seam, Zeus said, finally. Between the divine and the wizarding. Yes, Harry said. He will try again. In a more targeted way. I know. We need to address the seam, Zeus said. Not remove it, it's structural, it's not going anywhere and you wouldn't want it to. But fortify it. The way you fortify a hinge rather than replacing it. He paused. That's work for the summer. Properly done. Agreed, Harry said. Zeus looked at him for another moment. You caught Quirrell before he fell, he said. Reflex, Harry said. Yes, Zeus said. I know. He said it with something that was not quite the word proud but was everything proud meant when it was something bigger than the word. He let the silence hold it for a moment without reaching for the verbal version, because this was Zeus and that was how Zeus did the things he actually felt. Harry looked at him, at this impossible person who had picked up a baby on a cold English doorstep and had been, in every way that counted, his father since before Harry could remember anything else, and felt something that was too wide and too old feeling for a 10-year-old and was entirely accurate to who he was and what he had been given. I wrote the letter before I left for the corridor, Harry said. It's in Helios's things. Addressed to you both. In case. Zeus's jaw moved. Something that was not a word. He looked away, briefly, at the dark window with the cold night beyond it, and then looked back. "Good," he said, quietly. "I knew it wasn't going to be needed," Harry said. "But I wrote it anyway." "Yes," Zeus said. "Good." The hospital wing was quiet. Outside, the Scottish winter had settled into its full intention, the stars very clear and the grounds below very still. The lake would be more frozen tomorrow than it was tonight. Harry lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and listened to the fire and felt the shape of the day, everything it had been, everything it had changed. Voldemort scattered. Dumbledore recalibrated. The school sleeping around them and already different from what it had been this morning without knowing yet that it was different. He thought about the year, Ron's laugh, honest and helpless. Hermione's expression when she was right about something she'd worked hard to work out. Neville's face in potions when Harry told him his instincts were correct. Wood, 6 a.m., with absolute conviction. McGonagall's look when the match became a needle. The hat in the dark, saying you're larger than the categories, and Harry saying put me where I'd do the most good. He thought about what came next, Voldemort rebuilding, learning what he'd met tonight, approaching the problem in the new way that Zeus had predicted with the cold accuracy of someone who had been watching human conflict for several thousand years. The war was not over. It had changed shape. It was going to be harder and stranger and more interesting than it would have been if Harry had grown up in a cupboard under the stairs and emerged frightened and reactive and shaped by survival instead of by love. He thought, bring it. Not bravado. Not performance. The plain, accurate statement of someone who knew what they were and what they had and what they were building, and was not afraid of the work. "Harry," Apollo said, softly. "Yes." "Sleep." "I know," Harry said. "I'm going." He closed his eyes. The fire in the hospital wing kept its warm and steady watch. Outside, the grounds of Hogwarts lay cold and enormous and entirely themselves, and somewhere in the ancient structure of the castle, in the walls and the stones and the centuries of accumulated magic, something that might have been the castle's own awareness settled around the night with the feeling of something that has waited a very long time for a particular arrival and has finally, precisely, received it. In the morning there would be letters and questions and Hermione cataloging everything and Ron being loudly relieved and Neville looking at Harry with the specific expression of someone who had been watching a story from the outside and was working out how to ask to be part of it. In the morning there would be the rest of the year, and the year after, and the full shape of a war that was not going to be what anyone had planned for. In the morning the Prince of Olympus would sit at the Gryffindor table and eat his breakfast and plan his Tuesday. But first, sleep.